Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Issei secretly mastered Ice and Dragon. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Millennia of tradition overnight. Issei stubbornly thought he might lead this generation toward change, but he conceded when Draig reminded him that the elders were powerful and had survived the Great War. Serorg then stepped forward and declared that he wanted to become a Mao. Issei was surprised and thought Serorg had real confidence, even as some elders voiced opposition. Rias rose next and walked to the front to state her ambition. She explained that her goal was to explore the world in ways no devil ever had before, to uncover secrets forgotten by time, to venture into places devils had avoided, to visit heaven and speak with the angels without violence, to observe the progress of the Grigori, and to explore territories beyond the underworld. She even expressed a wish to go to Valhalla to meet King Odin and the Valkyries and behold things unseen by devils. The room fell silent at her words. Issei felt the shock and warm pride in Serzex's eyes as he looked at his sister. Rias bowed and took her seat. Sona then stood and adjusted her glasses before explaining her ambition to build a school dedicated to raiding games. Issei smiled at how fitting that was for their student council president. When an elder pointed out that a school already existed for that purpose, Sona clarified that the existing institution served only high-class devils and the children of the pillars. Her school, she said, would be open to everyone, nobles and reincarnated low-class devils alike, as long as they were willing to learn. Draig acknowledged the worthiness of that goal. Issei felt proud of Sona. A school without discrimination, he thought, would be a perfect catalyst for positive change. Many of the elders laughed at Sona's declaration, dismissive and scornful. Sona kept her composure, fists clenched at her sides. Saiji suddenly stepped forward to defend her, angrily demanding that the elders not belittle the student council president's dream. One of the elders warned Saiji to be careful and reminded him that he was only a reincarnated devil, asking Sona to train her servant properly. Sona bowed once and glared at Saiji, signaling for him to stand down. Saiji shouted for Sona to fight for her dream, but she told him that it was neither the time nor the place for that attitude and that they would discuss it later. He stomped off toward his peerage in frustration. Issei watched as the elders attacked Sona's idea and sighed, uncrossing his arms. Gasper began to move toward her, but Issei placed a hand on Sona's shoulder, offered a reassuring wink, and turned to address the elders himself. He bowed and introduced himself as Issei Hyoudou, a reincarnated devil. The elders brusquely told him he was not welcome and should leave. Issei replied that, if their intention had been to discourage future devils from sharing their dreams and to alienate them, then they had done an excellent job. Draig approved of Issei's passive-aggressive approach. An elderly, white-haired devil demanded whether Issei was mocking them, his face flushed with anger. Issei answered calmly that he was merely pointing out the effect their behavior had. When another elder called the students' ambitions stupid and useless, Issei countered by asking whether helping devils develop their strengths, allowing them to rise through merit, and learning from mistakes were really pointless. An elder scoffed that they were only reincarnated devils and of no consequence. Issei warned the elders to be careful with such words, cautioning them against dismissing others as merely reincarnated or fundamentally different. Several elders declared that they were stronger and that they were the true leaders. Issei spoke in an innocent tone, reminding them that the original Maos had been overthrown by their revered leaders earlier that day precisely because those rulers had thought that way and cared nothing for the lives of their subordinates. One of the elders asked menacingly whether Issei was threatening them. Issei returned the gaze coolly, then broke eye contact and scanned the assembly, meeting each of their eyes. He explained that he would never dream of threatening them and was merely reminding his elders of a recent history lesson. Draig noted that all the elders' claws seemed to be out today. A tense silence developed and stretched as some of the elders' glares intensified. A few began to glow faintly with power. At the peak of the tension, a laugh cut through the room. Belial laughed and said he liked Issei, praising the youth's fire, then leaned forward to inspect him more closely. He was a man with a graceful face, gray hair and matching eyes, and a faint scar on his cheek. Belial observed that Issei seemed unafraid of what others might say and wondered aloud whether the boy had the power to back up his words. Issei bowed to Belial, acknowledging him as the undisputed champion of the rating games, and promised that he would try not to disappoint. Belial advised Issei to simply show his best and told him he would have nothing to worry about if he did. Since Issei had stepped forward, Belial proposed an unofficial rating game, Issei and his MSDR's peerage against a young woman present. Rias reacted sharply, looking up from Issei toward Daihauser. Sona appeared taken aback and briefly lost her composure as she stared at Belial. Serafal became visibly excited at the idea of a match between Rias and Sona, announcing that she was already looking forward to it. Issei thought mildly that things had not gone according to plan. Draig asked doubtfully whether there had been a plan at all. After Issei's display of passive-aggressive combat, the meeting of the devils felt dull by comparison. Still, he could not rest easy. Most of the elders seemed visibly irritated with him. Sona stood among them, her gaze boring into the back of his skull. There was actually another presence he did not dare look at. Rias's expression alone made it clear she was displeased with him for little more than sitting meekly in a chair. The butler who had brought them into the room announced that the session was over, and everyone began to head for the exits. After the usual bustle of a crowd leaving a small chamber, a voice interrupted Rias's peerage. Agars looked at Rias with cool gray eyes behind her glasses and asked if she could speak with Hyoudou Issei. Rias nodded cordially and directed Agars to Issei. Agars reached up to adjust her glasses as she made the request. The others turned toward Issei, who sighed and gave them a tired smile, offering to handle the matter himself. Kiba asked if he was sure, glancing toward Agars's peerage, and Issei waved off their concern, saying he was fine and that he would meet them back at the Gremory house. Rias expressed reluctant agreement and left with her peerage. Issei waved farewell and indicated he would see them later. As he began to ask Agars what she wanted, Sikvera suddenly grabbed a fistful of his collar and dragged him down to meet her face. She demanded to know what he had been thinking. Issei mumbled a terse greeting as she released him, then straightened and smoothed his clothes, protesting that her actions had been unnecessary and that she would have understood his point even from a distance. Sikvera continued to glare at him, and Issei put his hands up in a placating gesture and promised to be quiet. She snapped again and then, composing herself, launched into a sharp reprimand about the elders. Draig noted inwardly that for someone small she had an impressively large voice. Sikvera explained, slowly and with force, that Issei had to understand who he had tried to teach a lesson. The elders of the devils, many of whom dated back to before modern Japan and who had experienced human history and the great events of the past firsthand. They had been set in their ways for ages, and he could not expect to change them with a single blunt action. Issei flinched at the volume but tried to explain that he had only meant to teach them a lesson. Sikvera warned him that repeating such a tactic would only make enemies. Issei conceded that she had a point and thanked her for the advice. Sikvera glared, then reminded him that he still owed her for a Gundam figurine. Issei reacted with surprise and outrage at the accusation that she had taken it, and the two immediately fell into a heated, petty argument. Sikvera insisted she had searched all day for the figurine. Issei countered that she had let go of it. She blamed him for distracting her. He denied distracting her. She accused him of dancing Thriller in a maid costume. He insisted she had lost a bet. Their bickering drew stunned looks from Sikvera's peerage. Sikvera's peerage watched in disbelief as their emissary, whom they had always thought prim and proper, argued over a figurine with a man. It was a strangely refreshing sight. Rias confronted Issei the moment he walked through the doors, trying to force answers from him, and her peerage stood behind her just as curious, waiting for what he had to say. Issei explained nervously that the girl had only wanted to talk to him about what he had done to the elders. Rias narrowed her eyes and asked whether that was all the girl had said, and Issei confirmed that it was. Kiba demanded to know why he had done it, and Issei looked away, saying it was personal and asking everyone not to press him. Everyone frowned at the unsatisfying answer. Rias hesitated but agreed to drop the subject. She noted that their rating game with Sona was 3 weeks away and that they should use the time to train. Azazel then walked toward them with his hands in his pockets and offered to help with the training. He said he wanted to become a coach for the rating game and might even make some money from it. Aquino questioned whether that would be cheating, and Azazel said it would not be, since he planned to help other teams as well. Issei sarcastically asked why the leader of the fallen angels would need a part-time job. Azazel replied that he actually owned several top companies and used figureheads to run them, but that was not important. What mattered was his longing to help others reach their potential. Azazel then suggested that it would be better for Issei to come with him for his training and presented a stack of papers he had prepared. He said he had drafted a training menu intended to produce the greatest gains in the shortest time. Aquino took the papers and distributed them according to the names on top. Azazel advised them to rest that day and begin training the next. He emphasized that improvement required pushing oneself and the right mindset. He then told Issei to go with him to his room, and Issei asked that Azazel at least buy him dinner first. They exchanged a few light barbs about Issei's sarcastic nature and Azazel's knack for mischief. Azazel casually mentioned that he controlled a wide range of media and corporate interests and sometimes used that influence to accomplish his goals, which left Issei incredulous. When Issei opened his door, he found Rainier sprawled on his bed. Rainier complained that the maid's training had been brutal and that she felt sore from it. She rolled over and winced, then saw Azazel standing nearby and became flustered, cheeks coloring as she greeted him awkwardly. Azazel returned the greeting with a bemused smile and told her she should feel fortunate to be trained by someone held in high regard. Azazel then explained that Graphia had once been a candidate for a high position and had even challenged Serafal Citri for a position within the hierarchy, though she had stepped back for personal reasons. He said Graphia's power had not diminished. Rainier was surprised that someone like Graphia would take an interest in her training. Azazel indicated toward Issei as if to suggest the reason lay in his connection to Graphia. Issei thought to himself about how ironic it was that Graphia had once been a candidate and now served as a maid, and he smiled at the memory of her interactions with her husband, convinced she did not regret her choices. Issei told Rainier that it was a valuable opportunity and that she would likely look back and be grateful for the training one day. Rainier deadpanned that if the training continued at that intensity she might end up needing medical attention and being cared for by nurses, and the group shared a moment of wry amusement before the preparations for their upcoming training continued. Rainier swore that she thought she had broken a bone or two. Issei told her to drink her milk in the exact same tone. Azazel stepped in and told them both to calm down, stopping the argument before it gained too much momentum. He then reminded Issei not to forget the reason he had come. Issei admitted he could hardly remember, and Azazel sighed. They exchanged a quick barb, then Azazel steered the conversation back to his purpose. Rainier glared at Issei, though her eyes were steadily closing. Issei frowned with concern and moved to her side, gently easing her down onto the bed despite her half-hearted protests. He suggested that she take a break and promised to check on her later. Rainier tried to protest but yawned, conceding that she could rest for 5 minutes. Issei watched as she slipped into a deep sleep, commenting that whatever she had been doing, she should do it more often because she looked much cuter asleep. Azazel observed that Issei meant when she was not insulting him. Issei grinned and covered Rainier with a blanket. The fallen angel unconsciously snuggled into the warmth. Issei then redirected the conversation and asked what Azazel had come to discuss. Azazel said he wanted to talk about Issei's training and walked to the refrigerator to fetch a beer for himself and a soda for Issei. Issei accepted the drink gratefully and asked what the regimen would be. Would he have to run back and forth to the village with a 50-kilogram shell, do 1,000 sit-ups, 2,000 push-ups, or confront his darker side to gain forbidden knowledge? Azazel remarked that Issei watched way too much anime. Issei admitted he did not know where he found the time for all his interests. Azazel offered a dry piece of advice, suggesting that if one asked for time, it would be given, and he gestured upward. Issei replied in a tone older than his years that everyone eventually ran out of time. Whether 10, 100, or 1,000 years, sooner or later one would end up cold and dead, just another life lived and passed on. Azazel stared at him for a long moment and then teased that he must be fun at parties. Issei snapped at him to shut up. Issei left the room whistling a tune. He had finally won their argument, but not without Sikvera demanding that he repay her for her figurine. It had been nearly 2 years. One would have thought she would have moved on by now. The student council president called. His name. He turned to see President Sona wearing her familiar scowl. Issei greeted the president, but Sona grabbed his collar and shoved his head down, forcing him into a lower angle than he was used to. Issei demanded to know what that was for and tried to free himself. Sona held him with a vice-like grip and glared into his eyes, asking what he had been thinking. Issei noted that they had already discussed this. Sona growled and shook him closer. Sona told him she was serious and that she had not needed his help before. She had been prepared to defend herself before the Council of Elders. Right now, she said, his rash behavior had only angered the elders. Issei replied that he understood, reached out, closed his hands over hers, and gently pried himself from her grasp. He argued that it was his life and his choice to help, and asked why everyone was so upset about his actions. Sona sighed and rubbed her forehead, asking if he truly did not understand. Issei asked her to humor him. Sona explained that he had embarrassed Rias not only before the elders but also in front of her future rivals. By openly assisting another emissar without Rias's permission, he had made it appear that Rias lacked control over him. Issei began to defend himself weakly. Sona acknowledged that both she and Rias knew the truth, but warned that others might not, and those others could try to use him against Rias. Rias was already under pressure as an heiress of a pillar. With her official debut into the raiding game scene, that pressure would only increase, and Issei's actions did not help. Issei gave a quiet acknowledgement. Sona asked him to promise not to jeopardize Rias's plans in the future. Distracted, Issei promised. That was all she asked. Sona inclined her head and left the room with her peerage, Saiji looking between his emissary and his friend before scurrying after the president. Issei muttered a curse under his breath and looked around the empty hallway before deciding to return. He knew enough about politics to navigate the situation, but he was not in the right frame of mind to use that knowledge wisely. He left, and old memories began to resurface. A boy had once stood rigid and attentive before a semicircle of elders, their elevated positions giving them an unmistakable air of authority. With a few chosen words, they could command the boy to undertake terrible tasks, even to risk himself, if they wished. They never did that because he was far too useful. Why would they destroy the tool they had honed and relied upon? The boy had no attachments beyond the academy. The elders had ensured that when they took him from his family as an infant, they assigned him and trained him until he became an ultimate weapon, one of the greatest tools they had ever created, made even more formidable by the god-slaying power of Longinus, the boosted gear. He became their perfect operative. Azazel announced cheerfully that Issei would spend the next 3 weeks with him after. He dismissed everyone to their respective training camps. Issei responded in the driest tone he could muster that it felt like a dream come true. Kiba had gone to his old instructor, the Knight of Surzex himself, Sugio Kida, the very same Sugio Kida who had captained the first unit of the Shinsengumi. To toughen himself, Kiba and his mentor planned to spend the whole time in the mountains and forests, living off the land. Azazel had placed Kaneko somewhere Issei did not know, telling him he would see later. Issei had smacked him across the face for that. Azazel had responded with an over-the-top, anime-style gesture, sending Issei sailing from the 3rd-floor balcony and landing him unharmed in a dramatic tumble. Zenobia followed her training schedule to the letter at an isolated Gremory family villa, living alone to hone her skill with Durandal, the Sword of Roland. Asia had been placed under the tutelage of Alice Fateburn, Milika's tutor in magic, a highly respected mage who had impressed even Surzex enough to be chosen to instruct his son. Azazel had spoken to Aquino privately. When they emerged, Aquino wore an expression that mixed shame, anger, and resigned acceptance. Issei assumed the conversation had something to do with her fallen angel heritage and, given her father Barakiel's title as the Lightning of God, suspected the governor had urged her to consider using the holy lightning the Ninth Watcher was famous for. Rias, meanwhile, had a private audience with Lissa Gremory, one of the oldest and most respected members of the family. Lissa had witnessed the fall of Helel and his transformation into Lucifer, had fought in the Great War, and had bled for her land and kin in the civil war that had nearly ended their kind. Now she lived quietly, content to watch over the family's future. Issei did not know what Rias and Lissa had discussed, but he trusted that Rias had gained the wisdom of someone who had seen what others could only imagine. Issei reminded himself that not all old perspectives were helpful by remembering a conversation he had once had with the spirit of a 5,000-year-old tree, which had amounted to little more than endless complaints about humans. He still hoped for wisdom rather than rambling, however. Azazel told Issei to lighten up and asked rhetorically if it could be that bad. Issei deadpanned that he did not know, since Azazel had not even explained what he planned to teach him. Azazel grinned sheepishly and admitted the omission. When Azazel grew serious, he leaned forward and told Issei that if he went all out he would, aside from a few exceptions, destroy nearly every competitor. Issei found the confidence surprising and asked if that was not a little generous. Azazel shook his head emphatically and reminded Issei that he had managed to hold back the hero faction of the Cows Brigade at 14, fighting warriors with years of experience and a few wielding superior weapons. In experience, skill, and strength, Azazel said, Issei already had the edge. Most of the others had never faced true life-or-death battles, having been raised in comfortable circumstances. Azazel explained that his aim was not to train Issei's body but to train his interactions with people. Issei stared and asked if that was all. Azazel grinned and clarified that Issei was going into the world of politics. Issei expressed surprise, having expected physical training. Azazel explained that it was still training, but for the mind, Issei would accompany him to scheduled meetings with leaders of other pantheons and try to speak with them without insulting them, a pointed reminder of Issei's recent run-in with the elders. The Security laughed nervously when he acknowledged that everyone had heard about that incident. Azazel asked Issei to be cordial, noting that people who were nobodies today could be leaders tomorrow and that some held grudges like no other. Issei scoffed at the idea that he would do anything to anger them. Azazel sighed that he had feared that reaction. Azazel told Issei he had a meeting in about 2 hours and that they should go to avoid being late and making a bad impression. Issei asked whether it was a bad sign for a devil to be seen with a leader of the fallen angels, worried that other pantheons might see him as someone suching loyalties or try to tempt him to their side. Azazel nodded in approval at the question and explained that seeing a devil under a fallen angel was actually a positive sign. The three factions were not merely in a mutual ceasefire but moving toward real peace. A devil accompanying a fallen angel showed growing trust between the groups, he said. Issei accepted the explanation but complained that it did not seem fair that he would have a few weeks off while the others trained around the clock. Azazel snorted and told him that politics was hardly a vacation. There was enough backstabbing and betrayal there to make fallen angels seem saintly by comparison, and that Issei had gotten the short end of the stick. Grayfia greeted them formally and led them into the Underworld's Department for Foreign Relations. Azazel and Issei followed her through a hallway lined with paintings that depicted devil history and lore. Issei paused at a painting of the Great War and another recent addition, the Kuo Treaty. The Ultimate Queen announced their arrival and stopped beside a huge double door carved with thousands of intricate images. Azazel urged them forward, stepped up, and pushed the door open with a casual motion. The room's occupants looked up. Surzex smiled at Azazel and Issei and welcomed them, explaining that the meeting had just started and gesturing toward 2 empty chairs at the table. Azazel took a seat near Surzex, and Issei sat opposite a young woman with long silver hair and light blue eyes, who wore a business suit and watched the proceedings attentively. Beside her sat an older man with long gray hair, a matching beard, and an eye patch. He supported a spear. The older man noticed Issei and raised an eyebrow. Surzex began to introduce them, but the man cut him off by stating that he already knew who Issei was and preferred to judge people for himself. The man stood, offered his hand, and identified himself as Odin. Issei responded respectfully, acknowledging Odin as the All-Father of the Aesir and bowing low in greeting. Odin laughed and admitted that he already liked Issei, then asked how Issei had recognized him so easily. Issei explained that Odin's presence, the eye patch, and the spear gave him away, and he mentioned possessing a weapon similar to Odin's spear. Odin in turn guessed the name of Issei's weapon with an amused smile and complimented Issei's skill. Issei accepted the compliment awkwardly, and Odin waved it off. Odin suggested moving on to the meeting. Rosweiss, the silver-haired woman, admonished Odin for his behavior and urged him to stop acting in a way that would embarrass their people. Odin introduced Rosweiss as someone inexperienced in relationships, and she reacted with visible distress. Issei flinched at the outburst. Odin shrugged and observed that Rosweiss had changed a lot recently, which only made her reaction stronger. Issei asked if that was normal, and Odin replied that such moments occurred more often than one might expect. Surzex cleared his throat and steered the conversation back to the meeting. Odin apologized for his earlier conduct, and Rosweiss gathered herself and promised to compose herself. The meeting, which focused on treaty negotiations, trade, and other formal matters, was postponed until after Serafal Leviathan, the Mao responsible for foreign affairs, returned from filming an anime. Issei sometimes wondered how the underworld managed with her as one of its leaders. After the postponement, Odin and Azazel chose to leave for entertainment nearby. Odin suggested visiting a lively social club, and Azazel offered an invitation to a nearby venue known for its buffet and drinks. They laughed and departed to enjoy themselves, leaving Issei with Rosweiss and Odin. Issei watched them go and muttered that the situation was absurd. Rosweiss sighed that young men would be young men. Issei accepted that and suggested they find something to eat. Rosweiss, blushing slightly, accepted his offer. Issei proposed a nearby mall since it was nearly lunchtime and offered to treat. Rosweiss agreed, and Issei asked what kind of food she preferred. Rosweiss squealed with delight, hugging the dolphin plushie to her chest and pointing out how cute the dolphins had been. Issei followed close behind with a warm smile. The two had gone to the mall and used the time to get to know one another better. Issei learned that Rosweiss was a Valkyrie, a prodigy assigned to serve as one of Odin's guards. She had devoted herself so intensely to her studies that she had few true friends, only acquaintances. It was a pity she was very appealing, and Issei's smile softened as he took that in. Rosweiss called his name and looked straight up. Issei blinked and then realized a vast shadow was passing over the town. He asked if that could be a dragon and extended his senses, discovering that the creature's power matched an ultimate-class devil. He felt compelled to see it in person. Rosweiss leaned forward eagerly and said she wanted to see it as well. Issei stepped back to regain some personal space and offered to run ahead and then come back for her. Rosweiss put her hands on her hips and accused him of being condescending, reminding him that she was Odin's bodyguard and could keep up easily. Issei apologized and they agreed to move before the situation escalated. Fire flared into being around his hands, summoning his gauntlets and shin guards. He gathered his energy and launched himself forward. Magic hummed behind them, its origin unknown. Given her status, it was likely Rosweiss was using Norse-based techniques. Together they raced toward the direction the dragon's shadow indicated. They sped through the streets of the underworld, buildings blurring past. After about 10 minutes they watched the dragon descend toward a mansion nearly as large as the Gremory estate. Issei and Rosweiss exchanged looks. Rosweiss suggested that Issei knock at the door. He protested that she had wanted to see it too, and they bounced a bit of teasing back and forth until Azazel leaned in the doorway and asked them to stop, amused that they sounded like an old married couple. Azazel waved a hand and mentioned that he and Odin had stepped away earlier. When Rosweiss inquired about Odin's whereabouts, Azazel said he was in the back with the others. Issei asked where they had gone, and Azazel gestured for them to follow as he explained. He said he and Odin had seen Sona returning from the mall, and Odin had wanted to speak with Sona since she was Leviathan's sister. Sona had taken the chance to ask Azazel for help training her peerage, and Azazel had agreed to assist, particularly interested in one of her pawns because of its untapped potential. He teased Issei that if they were in one of Issei's favorite anime, Issei would likely be the main character, while Azazel would be the cool, eccentric teacher. Issei could find no good rebuttal. Rosweiss called out for Odin and sprinted forward. Issei followed and saw through a sliding glass door the gardens of the Citri household. Sona's peerage had gathered there, all looking upward. A 15-meter-tall, purple western dragon sat in the backyard, impossible to ignore. Issei was stunned and asked who the dragon was. Azazel introduced the dragon as Blaze Meteor Dragon Tannen, an ultimate-class devil, and explained that Tannen was helping train their peerage member Saji, the holder of Vritra, who was slowly recovering nearby. Issei stepped forward and introduced himself as Issei Hyoudou, the current Hyoudou. Tannen rumbled in a deep voice and remarked on the day's surprises. First Vritra, and now Drake. Drake's presence came across in Issei's mind with a nostalgic tone, though Drake then clarified that Tannen had mistaken him for another dragon sealed in a sacred gear with a similar name. Issei muttered to Drake not to be so sharp. Drake replied that Tannen had once been a dragon king. There had originally been 6 dragon kings, but Tannen had become a devil, leaving 5. Tannen nodded and listed the others: Tiamat, Yulong, Vritra, Midgardsormr, and Fafnir. He admitted he had taken Saji on as a favor to Azazel. He could not afford to have a weak host for a dragon king. Drake shook his head at Tannen's pride and chuckled. Sona approached Issei with a cautious look and asked what he was doing there, noting that he should have been with Rias and the others. Issei realized he had not thought this through and tried to find a way to answer while Saji glared at him suspiciously. He began to explain that it was because of him. Rosweiss explained that she was new to the underworld and had convinced Issei to guide her. She added that she had seen Tannen fly overhead and wanted to see him, speaking smoothly as she bowed to everyone. Odin laughed and introduced her as his bodyguard. He grinned as he walked toward her, using his spear as a crutch, and said he wanted to eat, asking if she had money. Rosweiss reacted with a distressed cry. Issei and Azazel exchanged amused looks and laughed quietly at the 2 Norse representatives. A week into his supposed training week, Issei still had not done anything useful. He had spent his time wandering the mall bookstore and buying anything that looked interesting. His pack now held 17 new books and he had already read half of them. He wondered what to do next as he stopped at a park where children played and their parents watched with fond expressions. Smiling, he took a seat on an empty bench and watched them run without a care. He found himself comparing his life to theirs. In his mind, images flickered. A 7-year-old boy in training executing a cold, precise move to neutralize a target, another boy who laughed and darted around in a game of tag, narrowly avoiding a friend's clumsy reach, a youngster standing silently, waiting for instructions from the MSUS. A little girl leaning in as her mother whispered and then bursting into song, delighting her friends. A young performer on stage with a proud parent in the audience, and a boy who wore a convincing smile, while hiding a controlled, distant heart before carrying out a covert, fatal mission that left everyone unaware of who had done it. Valley appeared with a smirk and interrupted his reverie, leaning over the bench and offering him a can of iced coffee while explaining he was in town because he was keeping an eye on Azazel. Issei accepted the can and teased that Valley sounded like someone who pretended to be prickly but secretly cared, which made Valley choke on his drink in surprise. Issei mocked the gesture lightly and then asked how life had been treating him. Valley raised an eyebrow and said things were okay overall, though he complained that the women stared at him in a way that made him uncomfortable and self-conscious. Issei gave a quick smack to the back of Valley's head to puncture the complaint and told him to drink his coffee, which Valley grumbled about but obeyed. Rosweiss approached, smiling and carrying several bags. Valley leaned back to look over the bench so he could see her. Issei moved to make room and invited her to sit, and she agreed after glancing between the bags and the open space, saying she had a little time before she needed to deliver them to Odin. Once settled, Issei asked about the bags, and Rosweiss explained they were books about devils, their culture, history, and how their magic worked. She said she had been surprised to find how different demonic magic was from what she had expected. Issei reached for one of the books and joked about a pompous title. Rosweiss gently corrected him by saying that magic was more than equations and numbers. She explained that magic was about shaping the world, controlling emotions, and imposing one's will to create change, and she grew flustered apologizing for how serious she sounded. Issei smiled and complimented her, suggesting she would make a good teacher because of her earnestness and knowledge, and Rosweiss blushed and said she would consider it. He teased that she had the heart and the intelligence to back it up, reminding her she served as Odin's bodyguard, and she muttered that serving Odin was not always pleasant. Nearby, two women whispered that the pair looked cute together. Rosweiss' blush deepened as she fumbled and protested internally, and Issei watched with quiet amusement at the flurry of expressions crossing her face. Azazel announced while they were eating lunch in a cafe near the Gremory territory that Issei had been invited to the Phoenix household. Issei raised an eyebrow and set his coffee down on the table. He asked when the meeting would be and, thinking through possible reasons the Phoenix might want to see him, stopped counting at the 15th, to see the young man who had beaten up their son and disrupted a marriage. He decided it was pointless to keep listing reasons and that it would be better to get it over with. Azazel, reading his thoughts, smirked and told him the meeting was tomorrow at lunch, so he should be on his best behavior and wear his most expensive suit. Issei protested that he did not have a suit. Azazel offered to buy one and left some money on the table to cover their meal before leading the way to the nearby mall. Issei asked if he could borrow one from Vanillana, but Azazel declined, saying they needed something that fit his style. He scanned the storefronts until he found a shop that made custom-tailored suits and strode in with the air of someone used to getting what he wanted. Till the shopkeeper he wanted a suit ordered for the young man and that it should be finished by 6, indicating Issei, who raised a hand awkwardly. The elderly shopkeeper bristled, explaining that he was a very busy man and that customers normally had to wait. Azazel rolled his eyes and produced a heavy-looking bag of coins, tossing it to the shopkeeper, who caught it and stared at the weight in surprise. The shopkeeper agreed to measure Issei and said he would have the suit ready by 5. Azazel winked and remarked that devilish greed showed up in many ways but that money usually solved most problems, though he warned against bribing people to keep secrets and muttered that blackmail was more reliable for that. Issei deadpanned that he wanted to write that down. Azazel told him to be grateful and reminded him that since he was paying, Issei owed him. Issei said he would rather pay on his own. The shopkeeper asked which color they preferred. Azazel chose charcoal gray, explaining that it was the most versatile choice and appropriate for almost any occasion. Issei glanced meaningfully at the bag of coins on the counter. Azazel muttered for him to be quiet. Issei smirked. A maid at the door invited Issei inside, and he stepped through the grand doors of the Phoenix house feeling apprehensive. Only a few weeks ago he had been an opponent of their heir in a match that decided his future. Now he was a guest in their home. Lord Phoenix had been genial enough, but Issei worried about the rest of the family. He did not want more enemies after his blood. As if fate had decided to make things difficult for him, Issei encountered Riser Phoenix's queen, Hyoudou. She glared at him with a heat that seemed to raise the temperature around her, and she looked as if she was a hair's breadth from lunging at him. Issei stepped back, readying himself for a confrontation, hands twitching as if to summon his gauntlets. The head maid intervened and admonished Hyoudou that Hyoudou was a guest of Lord Phoenix's father and asked her not to sully the name of Phoenix. Hyoudou conceded reluctantly and said she would return to Riser-sama. The maid suggested that Hyoudou attend to whatever Riser-sama had told her to do first, so that he would not be disappointed. Hyoudou agreed with a small, sad smile, clearly not wanting to let her enter down, and she left. Issei watched her go, wondering what could make someone like Hyoudou look so melancholy. He shook his head and pushed the thought aside. He had a meeting to attend. He walked down the halls following the maid who had greeted him, passing 7 members of Riser's peerage along the way. Each of them watched him with expressions that mixed shock, anger, and something that looked like jealousy. The whole scene felt surreal to Issei, and Drake snorted in the back of his mind, dismissing the notion that anything mystical was at work. They arrived at a door that led to the main living room. The maid knocked and announced that Hyoudou was there. Issei heard someone cough and a chair scrape across the floor. The maid gave him an encouraging nod and opened the door, then stepped back to leave him to the family. Inside, Riser Phoenix fussed with his hair and smoothed his shirt, visibly self-conscious. The moment Riser saw Issei, he brightened and greeted him warmly. Issei returned the greeting politely and thanked Rayleigh Phoenix for the invitation. Rayleigh laughed, pleased, and found the situation entertaining. Ravel blushed on seeing Issei and asked what he was doing there, clearly flustered after a moment of silent surprise. Issei explained that the family had invited him for lunch and concluded that they must not have told her about it. Rayleigh teased that the secrecy made everything more interesting. Riser lamented missing a chance to prepare himself, still busy fixing his appearance, and the patriarch joked that Issei would not be bothered by physical appearance. Anastasia Phoenix, Rayleigh's wife, admonished Rayleigh to stop teasing and offered a warm introduction to Issei, saying that Ravel and Riser had told her many things about him. Issei returned the courtesy with light humor about quick wit and looks, prompting Anastasia to chuckle and remark that his children had not been lying. Drake registered surprise at Riser's comments about Issei's appearance and then decided to ignore the oddity. Issei steered the conversation toward learning more about the family, admitting that although they knew of him, he knew nothing of them. Rayleigh warned Issei playfully to be careful getting too close to Anastasia, recalling with humor the early days of his courtship when he had been bitten more times than he cared to remember. Anastasia protested that such remarks made her feel old but smiled, and Issei offered a light-hearted compliment that made her laugh. She motioned for him to sit near Ravel and said they would like to get to know him better. Issei walked back to the Gremory house, taking a detour through the gardens. Lunch with the Phoenix family had been interesting. Rayleigh had been louder and more lively than he had expected from a pillarhead, Anastasia had shown a teasing side, and Ravel had been easily embarrassed in his presence. That would have been manageable if Riser had not reacted the same way. The idea that Riser might feel some affection for him made Issei uneasy. Drake noted that the glares from Issei's peerage made that possibility easier to believe. Issei snapped that he would not entertain such a thought. He stopped to admire a striking plant he had never seen before. Venelana Gremory approached and identified the plant as the gardener's so-called Rose of Death, explaining that its scent could lure people into consuming it and awaken a hunger that could never be fully satisfied. She asked if Issei appreciated flowers. Issei bowed his head and said he did, having developed an admiration for them when he was still human. Venelana reflected that most flowers seemed to serve no practical purpose, and some considered that alone a reason to ignore them. Issei countered that many people were born without a clear purpose, but that did not mean they should be discarded. They lived and offered beauty. Venelana laughed softly and said Issei was an interesting person, and that her daughter was fortunate to have him in her peerage. She then mentioned that someone with silver hair had arrived at the house and teased that the visitor might want to see her future boyfriend. Issei stumbled over a crack in the path and protested as Venelana walked on toward the house, still smiling. Issei hurried after her, asking who it was. Venelana repeated that a silver-haired woman had come and said she would go on ahead, teasing that she would not intrude. Issei insisted it was not a date, and Venelana responded with a tone full of disbelief. Drake teased Issei about focusing on a potential romance while his teammates worked hard, but Issei insisted it was only two people getting together and harmless. Drake warned that such situations could lead to complications. Issei told the dragon to be quiet, reminding him that as a dragon he did not truly understand human affairs. Drake conceded that he was a dragon and mentioned, with a boastful tone, that he had many descendants, enough to fill a small country, which made Issei snicker at the mental image of tiny dragons charging playfully. Drake grumbled at being teased, and Issei continued toward the house, humming. Inside, Issei found Rosweiss seated on a couch with a pot of tea on the table. Rosweiss said that Odin had asked her to come. Issei raised an eyebrow at the All-Father's request and privately wondered about Odin's eccentricities and how the Norse pantheon managed with him as leader. Drake advised not to judge too harshly and mentioned that other powerful figures also had odd traits, which led Issei to accept the point. After an awkward silence, Issei asked Rosweiss about her studies on devils. Rosweiss brightened and explained that she had found devils to be surprisingly powerful in terms of magic and that understanding the underlying principles could make magic far more efficient. She described how fire was a form of heat and heat was excited particles. By drawing energy from elsewhere instead of producing it, one could create opposing elements without wasting extra power. Issei demonstrated by drawing heat from the air above his left hand to form ice and transferring that energy to his right hand to ignite a small flame. Rosweiss leaned forward, astonished, and examined the two opposing orbs of element hovering close to each other. Rosweiss narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously and asked if he was one of those super geniuses who could pick things up the moment someone mentioned them. Issei shrugged and said he was nothing of the sort, that he simply had a lot of practice. Rosweiss asked how he had learned. Issei explained that when he was a child he had focused mainly on ice magic, lowering temperatures and things like that, and that in his teens he had moved on to fire. He admitted he had not been very good at first and that he had very small reserves of magic compared to others, so he had turned to senjutsu. Rosweiss observed that he was making use of the energy around him. Issei confirmed this and described how he had learned to filter that energy into his body and turn it into mana. After practicing that, he had returned to ice and fire and realized the two were connected. When he used ice magic he took heat away from something, and when he used fire magic he generated heat. He wondered if it was possible to transfer heat instead of simply removing or creating it, so he practiced until he managed it. Issei grinned and said he was pretty proud of that achievement. Rosweiss murmured that he should be proud and noted that not everyone could conceive of such an idea. Issei then asked about her background. Rosweiss explained that she had spent her whole life studying magic and had also learned physics, chemistry, biology, and nearly every science there was. Issei whistled appreciatively and called that quite a resume. Rosweiss thanked him and then asked if, since he could control heat, he could make plasma. Inside the boosted gear, Drake groaned, wishing they would talk about normal things instead of getting carried away with geeky excitement. He thought he should have left them to their awkward silence. A party, Azazel told Issei in the middle of a poker game, was today's training. Issei was to try and bluff him in a card game to improve his skill at hiding his true feelings, an important skill in politics. Issei was skeptical but kept playing. He was leading, having won 12 of 16 hands, and when Azazel demanded to know how he was doing, Issei smirked and thought he was bluffing. The governor looked as though he was ready to strangle him. Azazel then explained that the Maos were sponsoring a party and had invited every devil who had come to the meeting, plus quite a few others. Odin would be there. Issei finished his coffee and asked if he had to go. Azazel replied that he did, laying his cards on the table and opening a beer, and said that if Issei skipped it, everything Azazel had taught him in recent weeks would be wasted. Issei deadpanned that he had not learned anything, so Azazel suggested the party could be an opportunity to meet new people. When Issei asked when it would be, Azazel said 8 o'clock, flipping through a newspaper. Issei slammed his hands on the table in frustration when he realized it was already 3 and was told to hurry. The party would be at the big convention center in the middle of town. Issei's suit had been freshly pressed and was in his room. Azazel added that Issei should bring Rainier as well. When Issei questioned why, Azazel said Rainier would throw a fit if she were not invited. Issei reminded him of the antisocial Rainier, who once tried to stab him with a fork when he tried to take her to the mall. Azazel answered awkwardly that Rainier had been dealing with her PRD then, which surprised Issei. Azazel tried to change the subject and asked simply whether he could not want his subordinate to at least try to enjoy herself. Issei accused Azazel of not being the type to care about such things, and Azazel pretended to be hurt while insisting that Fallen had to stick together and that he considered them family. Issei sighed, apologized, and agreed to take Rainier to the dance. When he asked what she would wear, Azazel said not to worry and that he had something perfect for her. Issei muttered that getting her to agree would be like pulling teeth. Rainier practically shouted that Azazel wanted her to go to a party wearing a dress he had chosen, and she pulled Issei along to his room. Drake watched with entertained commentary in Issei's mind, and Issei responded with an irritated mental gesture. They both fell silent as Rainier tried on the dress, gushing at her reflection and behaving like a normal girl. Issei found her oddly endearing as she fixed her hair into an elegant bun. When Rainier finished, she stood before Issei in an elegant black strapless dress that suited her. Issei, surprised at Azazel's good taste, complimented her and made her flush and grin. He then reached into his bag and produced a small rectangular box tied with a red ribbon, admitting that he had once planned to sell the item but now wanted to give it to her. Rainier stared in shock as Issei urged her to open it. She gasped when she saw a necklace with a blue diamond the size of a fingernail and stammered in disbelief. Such moments had only ever appeared in her private fantasies, where Azazel declared his affection for her. Issei offered a half-joking explanation that she could think of the gift as payment for being his maid, insisting it was the only one he would give and that she should be grateful. Rainier put the necklace on with trembling hands and thanked him quietly. Issei muttered that she was welcome. Azazel then declared that there had been enough flirting, startling them both. He said he had been there when the necklace was given and approved of Issei's move. Issei hurled a pillow at Azazel in embarrassment. The pillow bounced harmlessly off his face. When Issei demanded when they were leaving, Azazel said a carriage was waiting outside. Issei wondered where their comrades were, and Azazel explained that they were traveling by a different method and would likely arrive around the same time. With that settled, they left together, Rainier unconsciously touching the gem at her throat as they headed for the carriage. Issei sighed as he sat under a tree outside the party. It had been a little over 5 minutes since the three of them had arrived, and he had planned to wait for his emsor and her peerage. Azazel had laughed that he would go in first, and Rainier had looked conflicted until Issei motioned for her to go inside. He told himself that the quiet of the night was pleasant and sometimes being alone like this was not so bad. A rush of beating wings cut through the silence, announcing the arrival of a squad of griffins. Dust kicked up as they descended, each griffin carrying a companion. Issei covered his head for a moment, then laughed softly and walked toward them. He greeted them and asked how everyone was. Rias asked him to help her down from the griffin, and he obliged, noticing her hands linger briefly on his arm before she moved away. He thought she looked appealing tonight, and Rias thanked him, doing a small twirl to show off her off-the-shoulder dress. Her tied hair, pearl necklace, and the rose at her neck struck Issei as especially lovely. Kiba, trying hard to contain his laughter, asked Issei to help him down as well. Issei retorted brusquely, and Kiba dismounted with a graceful chuckle. Zenobia approached with her right hand still bandaged. When Issei asked what had happened, she held her hand up and explained that the bandage was mostly for appearance and that an injury from a wyvern had only recently healed. Issei pulled the bandage away with an admonishing glare and told her to act like she was attending a party. Kaneko, tugging at her dress and shyly seeking approval, asked Issei if she looked good. He stammered that she did. Gasper, similarly dressed in pale blue, looked flushed and asked the same question. Issei shouted in exasperation that Gasper should dress as himself. Asia approached hesitantly and hugged Issei, saying she had missed him and had learned many new things, which she promised to show him later. Issei returned the hug and said he had missed her too and would look forward to it. Aquino commented on Issei's popularity, and Issei laughed, saying he had missed them all. Aquino smiled mischievously and glanced at Rias, who narrowed her eyes with suspicion. Aquino then moved in and embraced Issei, saying she had missed him. Issei panicked inwardly, unsure how to respond. Before anything else could happen, Rias stepped in and pulled Issei back, asking if he was ready to go inside. The group agreed, and they began to move toward the reception. A sudden black blur tackled Issei, sending him sprawling as he found himself pressed against something soft. He struggled free and looked up into hazel eyes that sparkled with mischief. Kuroka had leapt onto him in her usual playful fashion and teased him with a flirtatious grin. Issei protested as she continued to tease, and Kuroka laughed before he managed to push her away. She pouted and suggested they continue catching up another day. They all shared a moment of amusement and then followed Rias toward the music and chatter of the gala, the party already well underway. Kuroka suggested she would teach him some advanced techniques when she had the chance, adopting a playful charm. Issei protested that she had no hold over him and wiped a small trickle of blood from his nose, insisting he was immune to her charm. Kuroka stared at him, unimpressed, and he coughed in embarrassment when he realized she was not buying it. He stood up, dusted himself off, and said he would head into the party. He then asked what she was doing in the underworld and whether she was still wanted. Kuroka replied proudly that her name had been cleared after Rias cleared up the misunderstandings. Her posture became confident as she spoke. Issei expressed surprise and, with a distracted glance toward the black cat at her side, muttered that it sounded like something Rias would do. He thought the cat looked dangerous. Kuroka pouted, caught up to him, and linked her arm through his. She chided him for leaving her hanging and said he should learn to see a lady properly. Issei asked, innocently, where the lady was, and Kuroka smacked him in annoyance. He groaned and rubbed his shoulder, expecting a bruise. When Issei tried to change the subject, Kuroka gripped his bicep with spirit-infused strength to emphasize her point. He winced at the painful pressure. It was strong enough to leave a mark. Kuroka explained that she had been in charge of Chiron's training and that Chiron was progressing with spirit techniques. She glanced at Issei and suggested that he was at least partly responsible. Issei admitted that he had helped a few weeks earlier, taught some things, and pointed Chiron onto the right path, though Chiron had performed the techniques herself. Kuroka hummed and teased that he was the main reason Chiron was learning. Issei blinked and asked why she would say that. Kuroka sighed, patted his shoulder, and remarked that he was clueless about these things, expressing sympathy for the girls involved. Issei protested indignantly and demanded an explanation for being called clueless. She nodded as if his reaction had proved her point. Issei asked her to stop using the formal title and told her to call him Issei instead. Kuroka brightened and did so. He approved with a thumbs up. Kuroka then looked at him expectantly. When Issei asked what she wanted, she called him an idiot for not understanding the obvious. It was a party with music, and he should go and dance. Issei hesitated, unsure who to ask. Kuroka stomped on his foot to get his attention. Issei yelped. Kuroka declared that he should dance with her. Issei finally understood and struck a fist into his palm, while Kuroka sighed and wondered silently why he was the way he was. Issei nearly collapsed onto the table and grabbed the glass of wine that had been handed to him. After his dance with Kuroka, his friends had each asked him for a turn. He had danced with each of them for a whole song, and by the time the last one ended his feet were begging for rest. Ravel called his name from across the room. Issei groaned in exasperation as he sipped his wine. Ravel, taken aback by his reaction, asked if it was a bad time. Issei smiled tiredly and offered her a seat. Ravel explained that her father was looking for her and that she had only come over to say hello. Issei prepared to decline a dance, but Ravel quickly changed her mind, raising her voice then composing herself into the demure posture of a young noblewoman and saying she had a little time. Issei hesitated, noting that her father had been searching for her, and Ravel dismissed the concern, insisting he could wait. Issei stood and offered his hand, and Ravel, blushing deeply, accepted and straightened up, offering him the honor of dancing with her. He led her onto the dance floor, weaving easily through the throng until they reached a spot he judged suitable. He then placed his hand gently at her waist and guided the steps. Ravel remained flushed but smiled, placing her hands on Issei's shoulders and allowing him to lead. As the music shifted into a slower tune, Issei asked about her recent life. Ravel explained with pride that she was now a free devil, because her mother had traded an unused bishop piece to her brother in exchange for her and had said she would be traded again only when Ravel found someone whose peerage she wished to join. Issei admitted he did not fully understand the practice, and Ravel sighed that many devils treated such trades casually, passing pieces along whenever they pleased. When the song ended, Issei reminded her that she should go to her father, and Ravel, clearly displeased, began to leave. She said it had been nice to see him, and Issei returned the sentiment and waved farewell. Ravel met Ubeluna halfway across the room. Rosweiss approached and asked who he had been speaking with. Issei explained that the young woman had been Ravel Phoenix, a friend of his. He raised an eyebrow and asked where Odin was, noting that she usually tended to him. Rosweiss sighed and said he had told her to attend the party and to enjoy herself. Rosweiss then revealed that Odin had made an insensitive remark to her earlier. She became distressed, declaring that Odin was too foolish and lamenting that she still did not have a boyfriend. Issei tried to calm her and fumbled for words, feeling awkward and uncertain. His inner voice argued with him. Issei briefly thought about the idea of being her boyfriend, and his spirit dregs snapped that Issei was being foolish. The spirit reminded him that he had asked for advice and then complained about it, and Issei regretted asking. Drake pointed out that he was all Issei had, and Issei muttered that he might need a different spirit. The spirit snapped back, and then reminded Issei that they were together for the long haul. Issei followed his instincts. He put an arm around Rosweiss' shoulders and guided her to a nearby table. He procured 2 glasses of wine from a passing butler and offered one to her. Rosweiss murmured her thanks in embarrassment and apologized for showing this side of herself. She drank the wine in one go, and soon began to sway. Concerned, Issei touched her shoulder and asked if she was all right. Rosweiss slurred that she was not and that she felt unsteady. The spirit suggested a silly test to see how drunk she was, and Issei dismissed the idea as he tried to steady her. Rosweiss suddenly insisted they dance and grabbed his hands, dragging him back out onto the floor with a giggling determination to put on a show. Watching the intoxicated Valkyrie do her best to embarrass them both, Issei could only think that someone up above must be laughing at him. Issei collapsed onto the same table for the second time that night, wishing he did not have to deal with any more awkwardness. Not long after he and Rosweiss had gone to the dance floor, she had passed out on top of him, likely from the 1 glass of alcohol she had taken. Issei had carried her back to her hotel room, made more uncomfortable by the fact that he had to ask Odin for the room information. Odin made an insensitive remark that annoyed him. After dropping Rosweiss off, leaving the keys on the bedside table along with a note explaining what had happened that night, a glass of water and some medicine to guard against a hangover, Issei returned to the party, which was slowly winding down as more and more guests left. He did not see Rias or the others and assumed they must have thought he had gone home. He stood up to leave when someone looked at him with a raised eyebrow and arms crossed over a conservative silver dress. Issei greeted her awkwardly, noting her expression. Sikvera narrowed her eyes at him and demanded whether he had any idea how foolish he had looked. Issei raised his hands and insisted that whatever had happened to upset her had not been his fault. Sikvera told him he had appeared ridiculous, describing how he had been dragged around the dance floor by a stumbling woman. Issei protested that things could have been worse and then joked about cross-dressing, which only made Sikvera palm her face and complain that he was missing her point. Issei shrugged and called himself an idiot when she sighed and said as much. Sikvera decided she would go home and take a long soak because she was tired of talking. Issei asked if she wanted to dance first, boasting that he was a decent dancer who would at least avoid stepping on her feet. Sikvera nearly stumbled and accused him of being ridiculous, then stomped away, nearly knocking over a butler who was cleaning up a table. Drake, in his usual blunt way, observed that Sikvera had not said no, while Issei took her retreat as answer enough. He walked toward the garden exit and began to hum along to the fading tune from the band, breathing in the cool evening air and enjoying the quiet for a moment. Drake teased that such moments were better shared with a woman, and Issei muttered at him. Issei noticed Rainier nearby, looking dejected as she kicked at the ground and stirred up dust. Drake urged him to take the chance to speak with her. Issei could not ignore how downcast she looked and decided to approach. He offered to listen and Rainier turned to him. Her face brightened briefly and then dimmed when she realized who had spoken. She responded coldly, saying she would not expect someone like him to understand. Issei, puzzled, pressed for what she meant. Rainier snapped that he could not possibly understand the troubles of a fallen angel like her, accusing him of being on a fast track to prominence as a high-class devil and telling him he was the Red Dragon Emperor of his generation. She said that he seemed to have many admirers. Issei blinked in confusion at the last point and denied it. Rainier sighed and delivered a sharply worded insult to punctuate her frustration. Issei was lightly amused and impressed by her sharp tongue. Drake remarked on her cleverness. Issei then asked more gently what was really wrong. He moved closer and laid a hand on her shoulder, sincere concern in his voice. Rainier spat that he would not care, but Issei insisted he did and tried to convince her. He reached out and gently steadied her, urging her to meet his eyes with a promise of understanding. Rainier began to waver at the warmth and conviction she saw there. She tried to pull away but paused at the sincerity of his expression. Eventually she sighed, pushing his hand away and calling him stubborn, her tone softened by resignation. Issei smiled, satisfied that he had brought her around enough to talk. He sat on a nearby garden desk and motioned for her to join him. Rainier complied awkwardly. She warned him not to laugh and demanded he promise, and Issei raised his arms and swore he would not. Rainier admitted that what she wanted to say was stupid, then began to stand. Rainier admitted that she never should have done this. Issei responded with a small smile and reassured her that she could trust him, pointing out that he had done plenty of foolish things himself and would not mock her. Rainier muttered that fine, she would tell him, and Issei smiled in triumph as he made space for her on the bench and waited. After a few minutes of silence, Rainier began by saying that love was mysterious. Issei nodded and explained that he had never been in love but understood the feeling. Rainier confessed that she did not think she loved Azazel-sama. She respected him a great deal, but it did not feel like love. Issei raised an eyebrow and teased her about the timing, wondering if someone had finally captured her heart. Rainier punched his arm half-heartedly and told him to shut up, and Issei laughed and rubbed the spot. Rainier said that she had seen Azazel-sama talking to an older man with an eye patch and overheard them discussing their lives as leaders. The conversation made her realize she knew almost nothing about him, what he liked, what food he preferred, how he spent his days off, or even if he had days off. Issei thought to himself that Azazel probably spent days off provoking others, but he did not say it aloud. Rainier wondered aloud whether she loved Azazel-sama or the image she had of him. The Hyoudou fell silent, mulling over her words. Rainier suddenly looked mortified and warned Issei to keep the secret. Issei raised his hands to reassure her that her secrets were safe with him. Rainier pressed him further, warning that he would have her to deal with if he betrayed her trust. When Issei promised and she demanded a swear, she then asked him to tell her something about himself. Issei asked what she wanted to know. Rainier insisted that she wanted to know anything about him, because she did not really know him. Issei sighed and teased that she was a cruel maid before looking up at the night sky to think. He then chose to share a story from his past. Issei described a brother figure he had, someone he had idolized and learned from. Their relationship had ended disastrously after a disagreement. They became entrenched in their positions, and the conflict escalated until it turned violent and Issei was hunted by the other side. He said that decision had been the moment he felt like more than a body following orders. He did not regret it entirely, though he still missed the brother sometimes. Rainier observed that he was a very strange person with a strange past. Issei protested that she had asked for the story. She admitted she had not expected such a tale and had assumed from his outward appearance that his life had been a happy one. Issei shrugged and reminded her that she only knew his exterior, not who he was inside. Rainier teased that he sounded like an insecure woman, smirking as she said it. Issei muttered that she should shut up, acknowledging that he had probably picked up the line online. Drake chimed in mentally, teasing that it was partly Rainier's fault and that Issei spent too much time browsing the internet. Issei mentally retorted that nobody had asked for Drake's opinion, and Drake chuckled to himself. Rainier laughed softly and called her an idiot. Issei told her not to be insulting. Rainier said that his flaws were what made him interesting and smoothed her outfit, noting that at least he would not bore her. She asked if that was right. Issei asked if he was only a source of entertainment. Rainier cheerfully replied that was pretty much the case. Issei repeated that he had such a cruel maid, smiling faintly as he looked toward the building where the last song of the night was playing. Suddenly Issei asked Rainier if she would like to dance. Rainier was startled and asked why. Issei said simply that he wanted to. He reached out and took her hands, bringing them close. Rainier protested about the closeness and insisted she had a say, her cheeks flushed. Issei cheerfully refused any denials. Rainier gave up and leaned against him for a moment in a quiet, almost embarrassed gesture, murmuring that this did not make up for what he had done and reminding him not to tell anyone. Issei confirmed that she could trust him and hummed along to the fading song. They moved together through the remainder of the music until it finished, marking the end of the party and Issei's last dance of the night. Afterward, Rainier asked if he was going to fight soon. Issei confirmed that he would be participating in a raiding game. Rainier glared and told him to make sure he performed well, insisting that he had to uphold his image as her Issei agreed, smiling as he called her a fierce little maid. The night before the rating game, Ria stood before the group and outlined their opponent. She pointed to the screen where the rival team's portraits were displayed with their names beneath them and explained that Sona Citri would lead their team as king. Rias named Sona's queen as Tsubaki Shinra, the bishops as Momo Hanakai and Rei Kusaka, a knight as Tomo Meguri, a rook as Tsubasa Yura, and Saji Genshuru and Ruruko Nimura as pawns. The heiress of the Gremory clan closed the collapsible pointer and looked around the room, then asked if anyone had questions. Issei raised his hand to ask where the battlefield would be located. Rias replied that neither team knew yet. The location and type of battlefield would be announced the next day. She added that their elder had said it was a good way for devils to learn to adapt in unexpected environments rather than relying on prior information to gain an advantage. Drake agreed and noted that a human scientist had argued that the most adaptable were the most likely to survive and pass on their traits. Issei acknowledged that was essentially Darwin, and Drake admitted he had read about it in a tone reserved for scolding, which only raised Issei's curiosity briefly before they moved on. Rias then asked Hyoudou how long he could maintain his balance breaker. Kiba answered that he could sustain it for 12 hours at a stretch for now, though he was uncertain how long he could keep it up during the chaos of an actual battle, since he had not fully tested it yet. Rias reassured him that it was fine. He had only recently achieved balance breaker and the match would be an excellent opportunity to demonstrate it. She stood a little taller, obviously proud of her knight's accomplishment. Rias suched the presentation to explain the 4 general classifications of rating game participants: power, technique, wizard, and support. She described wizards as specialists in manipulating magic, placing herself and Akino in that category. Power types relied on overwhelming strength and one-hit finishes, like Zenobia and Kaneko. Technique fighters used skill and trickery to confuse opponents, which suited Kiba. Support types generally stayed back to assist teammates, similar to Asia's healing or Gasper's observational abilities. Issei pointed out, somewhat self-conscious, that he had not been clearly categorized. Akino answered that he was a jack of all trades. He could act as a wizard with his fearsome flames, gain overwhelming force through the boosted gear, and fight with technique. The only role he did not fit was support, according to her. Issei considered this for a moment, and then Drake, through Issei's thoughts, began to suggest a different angle. Issei explained slowly that he could indeed serve as a support. He raised his arm to indicate the boosted gear and reminded everyone that it doubled his power every 10 seconds. He then described its secondary ability, called Gift, which transferred the power he accumulated through boosts into other people, objects, or magical constructs. He cited the example of strengthening the school's defenses during the Kuo Treaty and concluded that the boosted gear allowed him to fill many roles after all. Kiba pointed out that being a jack of all trades did not mean mastery of none. Issei was strong in many areas and had already proven himself in several ways, from flames that had defeated formidable opponents to victories of pure skill. Issei blushed at the praise and scratched his cheek awkwardly. Akino laughed softly at his flustered expression, and the others, Zenobia, Kiba, Ija, Kaneko, and Gasper, nodded in agreement that he was endearing when embarrassed. Rias warned Akino to stop teasing, though she admitted she agreed with the sentiment. Rias brought the group's attention back to the present by pointing out that it was almost time for dinner, and everyone rose to go to the main dining room in the Gremory mansion. The procession moved through the halls, led by attendants, toward the large dining hall. Issei wondered silently why the house required so many dining rooms when only a handful of Gremory lived there permanently and the rest were caretakers. The pleasant march toward dinner was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Kuroka at the doorway. She stepped in wearing a maid outfit and greeted the group playfully with a cat-like meow, offering dinner, a bath, or company in a teasing tone. Kaneko called out in surprise behind him, clearly embarrassed, and Issei reacted with obvious shock. Rias immediately moved forward and demanded why Kuroka had entered the mansion uninvited and behaved in a way that might be inappropriate for guests. Kuroka's expression turned cheeky as she twitched her tail and toyed with the situation, but when Rias made it clear that indecency would not be tolerated on the premises, Kuroka nodded and agreed to behave. The confrontation ended with Kuroka promising to respect the house's rules, and she left shortly afterward. A short moment of calm returned as everyone resumed their walk toward the dining room. Kuroka called to Issei in a teasing tone, drawing several stares. Zenobia muttered triumphantly as she took out a notepad and pen, furiously documenting what was happening right in front of her. Asia asked politely for the notepad when Zenobia was done, her eyes on Kuroka with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. Akino watched the black cat attentively and wondered quietly whether this was a new rival or only playful teasing. Rainer announced. That dinner was served as she entered carrying trays of food, balancing them perfectly. When she saw the scene, she slammed a tray down on the table and glared at Kuroka, demanding to know what was going on with Issei. Kuroka answered that she was trying to provoke Issei, aiming to tempt his more impulsive side in hopes he would lose his composure. She added that she intended to wear provocative outfits and keep pushing until he gave in to his feelings for her, speaking with an almost mischievous calm. Issei reacted dismayed and confused, overwhelmed by the impression his friends seemed to have of him as an incorrigible pervert. Kuroka, tilting her head, said she had dressed the way she did because she thought it would please him, and she had planned to keep teasing him until he could no longer resist his emotions. Rainer protested loudly that she could not allow that. Kuroka raised an eyebrow and questioned Rainer's objection. Rainer insisted she was Issei's maid and that there should only be one maid. Issei asked aloud who had made that rule but was ignored. He sighed in resignation and accepted the chaos. Kuroka reassured Rainer that she would not take her place as Issei's maid and that this was only practice. She mentioned that she had bought a variety of uniforms and costumes for the evening as part of the rehearsal. Issei reacted with a sudden nosebleed from the overwhelming situation. Kaneko stepped forward and asked her older sister if she could borrow one of the costumes. Kuroka said that some of her clothes would not fit Kaneko but quickly added that she had bought costumes specifically for her as well. Kaneko brightened at that and asked how Kuroka knew her measurements. Kuroka blushed and claimed it had been a lucky guess. At the dining table, Kiba reminded everyone that dinner would get cold, but the commotion around Issei continued. He began eating despite the distraction. Gasper observed that Issei was very popular and then joined in the meal. Issei sat in a meditative pose on the coffee table in the waiting room, a short distance from everyone else. In the room were Setsuya, Venelana, and Milikas, there to support their daughter and older sister. Everyone in Ria's peerage except Asia and Zenobia wore the Kuo Academy uniform, which had become the Occult Research Club's unofficial attire. The uniforms had been specially made from far more durable material than ordinary cloth to withstand real combat. Asia wore her nun's habit, and Zenobia had chosen a form-fitting black combat outfit similar to what she and Irina had worn on their mission to Kuo City to retrieve the stolen fragments of Excalibur. Issei continued his breathing exercises, counting inhales and exhales to calm himself, a habit that helped him stay composed and avoid reacting in a way that could be harmful in a fight. Kiba reminded him that the match was about to start, and Issei acknowledged it with a brief nod as he stood and stretched to loosen any stiffness. Magic circle flared beneath them and transported the Gremory group to their designated battlefield. The first things Issei noticed were the crashing waves and the salty sea breeze that gently tousled his hair. The second was the shadow that fell over him. When he looked up he saw a lighthouse about 30 meters away, confirming they were on an island. Zizel announced himself as the arbiter of the match, appointed by Surzex Lucifer and Seraphal Leviathan. He explained that the battlefield was an island about 25 kilometers across at its farthest points. Rias was located at the southeastern part near the lighthouse, while Sona stood at the northwestern edge near the ocean. Azazel described special rules for the match to make it more interesting and made a brief, inappropriate joke that was quickly cut off when he was interrupted, leaving a slightly embarrassed pause. Azazel then instructed the kings to look to their right, and a floating magical construct with a payload appeared. Rias reached out and carefully took the object into her arms, mindful not to damage it. The objective was clear, and Rias understood what she needed to do. She prepared to move. The objective was to take the other's prize to your base while protecting your own from being stolen by the opposing king. Issei observed that the prize was a suitcase and asked why it was a suitcase. Azazel explained that the contents represented information and that information was power, especially in times of conflict. He described the rules of the match. Magic formed a 10-meter by 10-meter square around them, glowing briefly before settling into a cool purple. Asia flinched at the display. Azazel explained that the game would be won when either Sona or Rias brought the other's prize into their own magical square. Each team was allowed to place its suitcase anywhere inside their square, buried, airborne, or carried by a creature, so long as it remained within the perimeter. Tampering with the prize was forbidden. Altering it with magic or transfiguration, or submitting incorrect information, could have serious consequences. If both suitcases were destroyed, the match would end in a tie. The teams had 30 minutes to prepare. Azazel wished them luck. Issei mused that it might be a shout-out to the Hunger Games. Kiba, leaning closer to inspect the suitcase Rias held, asked if he meant that famous novel from years ago. Aquino chided them both and also looked at the game's MacGuffin. Rias considered where to place the suitcase and said it needed to be somewhere clever, somewhere Sona would never think to look. Zenobia proudly announced that she already had a solution and stood beside the 5-meter deep hole she had been digging with Durandal. She suggested they put the treasure in the pit and then cover it with dirt so Sona would never think to look there. Issei reacted that the plan was too obvious and reached up to smooth his twitching eyebrows. Kaneko pointed out that even if Sona did not expect it to be there, it would be too easy for someone to dig it out and check. Aquino agreed that placing it in the hole would not be a good idea. Zenobia looked crestfallen, and Issei felt he should try to cheer her up. He reassured her that she could go all out on defense instead, which brightened the blue-haired knight. She asked if she could use Durandal as well. Issei blinked and wondered why she had to ask, while Drake wondered how she had managed to dig a hole with a sword. Rias then said she knew how they would proceed, and everyone leaned in to hear her plan. Issei found the situation boring as he leaned back on a tree stump. 15 minutes had passed with nothing of note. Drake mused telepathically that Issei should be used to this kind of waiting. Issei replied that he was used to it, but that did not make it any less dull. Drake pointed out that the princess and the others were moving cautiously. She had to be wary of the president's traps. Issei sighed and wished they would hurry, wanting to do something in the game. As he thought that, his senses detected 2 signatures approaching slowly, and he smiled at the prospect of finally getting involved. After 5 more minutes, 2 figures emerged from the treeline. Issei casually raised a hand in greeting and addressed the 2 as the student council president and Saji, which put them on guard. Sona nodded curtly and scanned the area for the suitcase. She asked if he could tell her where he had placed it. Issei cheerfully replied that he could not. She would have to find it, and he apologized that it was the rules of the game. Sona adjusted her glasses and asked Saji to protect her while she searched. Saji puffed out his chest and affirmed that she could count on him. Issei thought aloud that if his opposing king, Sona Citri, were retired, it would mean an automatic win for their team. Issei mentally told Drake to keep it low-key, and Drake agreed. Sona's eyes widened as Issei suddenly kicked off the tree trunk and closed the distance, gauntlets forming on his hands in a burst of flame. Sona leapt back and summoned water to try to overwhelm him. Drake raised a hand and responded with a pillar of flame that met the torrent, turning it into steam and briefly obscuring the area. Sona scanned the surroundings to anticipate where Ria's pawn would appear. She instinctively ducked and rolled forward as the ground where she had stood moments before split into a crater from Issei's blow. She immediately summoned her power, sending a tsunami to encircle Issei. She stared at the watery vessel she had created, testing whether it could hold the security eye. It was not sufficient. The makeshift prison burst apart, drenching everything nearby, and Issei stood with his hand ped behind him. Sona activated absorption line, but the fist never connected because of a last-minute save. Issei turned to see Saji's sacred gear primed, a cord wrapped around Issei's right hand. Sona praised Saji, and used her power to kick Issei in the abdomen, sending him flying. Issei twisted in the air and watched as Saji prepared his sacred gear again. Black flames began to coat Saji's arm, and Issei reacted with alarm, wondering since when Saji could use such power. Saji launched an attack at Issei as he closed in. Issei crossed his arm to absorb most of the hit. Issei felt the heat and drew in nature energy to soothe his burns, puzzling over why he had been affected despite being part dragon. Drake observed Saji through Issei's senses and noted that Vritra's aura seemed different, more complete than it had been before. Issei realized that Saji had powered up as well and decided to raise his own power. He asked Drake for a boost, and Drake complied. Issei grinned, kept his body low, and challenged Saji that if he was going to fight like a dragon, Issei would do the same. Saji, who regarded Issei as a rival, said he expected nothing less and readied himself. Then the two of them clashed in a fast-paced exchange of blows and energy, each responding to the other's movements with determined focus. Kiba reported that nobody was there as he peeked out from the trees and cautiously stepped into the open area near Sona's territory. He added that there was no one he could see. Rias told Hyoudou that would be enough and approached her knight with Gasper and Kaneko at her right and left respectively, Asia at her side, Zenobia on point, and Akino bringing up the rear. Kiba scanned the clearing again and noted a stack of identical suitcases piled into a 20-foot-high pyramid. He said he saw a lot of targets. Rias raised an eyebrow at the sight and observed that she now understood what he had meant. Akino murmured that this would be troublesome and leaned forward to inspect one of the suitcases. She studied it for nearly a full minute before standing and explaining that the fake ones emitted a faint signal. She demonstrated by pulverizing the one she held with lightning, startling both Asia and Gasper, and said it might take a while but she was confident she could find the real objective beneath them all. Kiba warned that they did not have much time, summoned 2 swords, and stepped back closer to his group, his eyes scanning as other student council members began appearing around them. Tsubaki Shinra stepped forward, greeting Kiba while wielding a naginata. Kiba acknowledged Tsubaki and asked if they could get through this without fighting. Tsubaki apologized and explained that the vice president would not allow it because the president wanted to win and it was her responsibility as queen to help reach that goal. Kiba said he understood. Rias ordered Hyoudou to stop flirting with the enemy, which made Tsubaki blush and Kiba splutter in embarrassment. Rias then took command of the situation, assigning roles. Everyone was to buy Akino time while she searched for the real objective, avoid overextending, and not fall for traps. Zenobia was asked to avoid using powerful blasts that could destroy their goal. Hyoudou was to give one of his swords to Akino. Asia was to stay close to Rias. Gasper was to try to use his sacred gear when opportunities arose. Rias planned to shoot any opponent who came near. If they reached the group, Hyoudou and Zenobia would handle them. She asked if everyone understood. Everyone answered that they understood and moved into their roles. Rias raised her hand and an orb of pure destruction materialized. She hoped Issei had not run into trouble yet, then sighed, remarking to herself that of course Issei would find a way into trouble. Issei struck Saji with a backhand, grimacing as Vritra took the brunt of the blow. His eyes widened and he pushed away, using Saji as a kickboard and dodging a spear of condensed water that struck where he had been moments before. Drake suggested telepathically that he might use Balance Breaker, noting that Issei seemed to be having trouble with the kid. Issei replied that he preferred not to rely on Balance Breaker and treated this as a growing experience. Drake compared other powerful techniques and teased that Issei had yet to achieve some of them. Issei pointed out that Drake still had not explained what they were, and Drake replied that Issei needed to achieve it first. Issei muttered that this was typical and kept low to the ground. He glanced at Sona, who was watching for traps and searching for the suitcase, and at Saji, who held his position ready to defend and protect Sona if needed. Issei unleashed Ignis Draconi, sending a lance of flame towards Sona. Saji countered with Blaze Black Flare, black flames meeting Issei's gold fire in a heated clash. Saji strained against the brilliance of the fire until the flames subsided and he looked briefly stunned. He then saw Issei running towards Sona as the student council president threw stream after stream of magic, water, fire, bursts of air, each strike growing weaker and easier for Issei to evade. Saji launched a cord that snagged Issei's right arm across the bicep and claimed he had caught him. Issei muttered that this was getting annoying and a hand sliced past, taking a few hairs as a warning. Saji yanked at the line again, making Issei stumble. Sona seized the opening and launched a barrage of magical and physical strikes. Issei, still off balance, threw himself to the ground and used Ignis Draconi again. The burst of fire flipped him through the air and carried Saji along with him. Saji's cord detached and he landed on his back, momentarily winded. Issei muttered that the situation SED as he backed up to keep both Saji and Sona in sight. The holder of Vritra began to pull himself up, still dazed. An announcement declared that Sona's rook and bishop had retired, and that Rias's knight had retired. The three combatants looked up at the message. Sona frowned in concern. Saji, more worked up than before, reassured the president that they could still win. Issei asked Drake who between Kiba and Zenobia was more likely to be retired. Drake suggested that Zenobia seemed the type to charge head-on, so his bet was on her. Issei agreed that he had thought the same. At an infirmary in the underworld, a newly transported knight sneezed, and the healers fussed over her in concern. Sona, the student council president, told Saji that if two of their own had been eliminated, then Rias's side was gaining ground, and asked Saji to distract Issei while she searched for the suitcase. Saji answered energetically that he would. He then paused, staring at the ground, and pointed to a clearly covered hole at the center of the boundary marking Rias Gremry's temporary territory. Sona admitted she had not checked there and asked why anyone would hide something so important in such an obvious place. Issei flinched. Sona turned her unforgiving gaze on Issei and asked whether he had placed the suitcase there. Issei stubbornly refused to say. Sona massaged the bridge of her nose and declared that his silence was as good as admitting they had placed it there, demanding to know why he would do such a thing. Issei argued that if one could not hide in anonymity, audacity was the next option. He then reminded the group that this was President Sona, who tended to overthink things, and suggested that Zenovia's plan to subvert expectations made sense. He added with a cocky smirk that where they put the suitcase would not matter if they won before the others reached the spot. Aquino chuckled at Issei's confidence. Rias entrusted Issei with holding the point, and he accepted. Sona, surprised, conceded that the idea was clever. Issei bowed and said the approach had served him well for years. Saji pointed out that Sona was getting sidetracked. Embarrassed, Sona asked Saji to cover her while she dug for the suitcase, though she sounded incredulous about the idea. Issei smiled and refused to let them dig, insisting he wanted to win too. Saji grinned, his sacred gear primed. Issei crouched low and the world seemed to slow. A leaf separated from its branch and drifted to the ground. As if that were the signal, Issei burst forward in a blur, moving at unbelievable speed. Saji charged to meet him, nearly matching that pace. The two collided in a barrage of powerful blows, their clash producing shockwaves that shook the ground and sent trees toppling and clouds scattering. The battlefield became a whirlwind of fast, flashy strikes and counterattacks, the kind of cinematic, high-energy combat seen in an action sequence. A stray ball of flame landed nearby, and Sona flinched. She took a moment to observe the two fighters and the chaos their duel was causing. She thought about how powerful dragon-blooded beings could be, wondering aloud to herself what even greater destructive potential a true dragon or a dragon god might possess, then swallowed her apprehension and returned to her task. Issei sprang back, landing on a tree and leaping to another as one of Vritra's lines severed the branch beneath him. He admired Saji's skill, attributing it to training with a Dragon King. Drake, speaking in Issei's mind, corrected him that the Dragon King title was no longer applicable now that the being was a devil, but Issei waved the point aside and focused on the fight. Issei timed his movements to dodge another line and caught it, planting his feet and swinging to fling Saji into the air. Saji righted himself at the apex, detached the line, and deployed his devil wings to gain aerial advantage. Issei muttered that aerial combat was not his strength but reminded himself he would do what was necessary. He considered summoning his own wings but then shifted tactics, deciding to force Saji down with a barrage of ranged attacks. He prepared to unleash Dragonfire. Sona announced triumphantly that she had the suitcase. Issei saw that she had dropped her guard and launched a fireball, and Saji intercepted it by throwing one of his own. Issei thought that he did not want to use his balance breaker, that would be overkill. Sona adjusted her glasses and agreed, telling Saji that if they were to advance they had to force Hyoudou to retire from the game. Saji pledged to do his best for the student council president, then readied a different sacred gear from the ones he had used before and activated Shadow Prison. Issei's eyes widened and he slammed his foot into the ground, creating a crater, twisting his body to just avoid the emerging shadow. The shadow persisted, crawling toward him. He jumped and evaded again, but the darkness kept following. Saji struck out with Absorption Line, an inky cord lashing toward Issei's leg and yanking him down. Shadow Prison followed, the darkness folding around half of Issei's head and most of his body, obscuring his sight and muffling sound. He panicked and pushed against it with everything he had. Issei activated his boost ability, doubling his parameters as he fought the binding shadows. Saji sent more Absorption Line tendrils, which ran along Issei's arm and began to drain his strength. Another coil tightened his neck and forced him to his knees. Saji, proud of the effort he had put into training with Emissar Tanin in the mountains, taunted that this was the fruit of his training, that he could finally reach Hyoudou's level. The shadow expanded and enveloped Issei completely, holding him tense and unresponsive on the ground like a prisoner of darkness. Wisps of shadow curled and faded with an eerie beauty. Sona told Saji to keep Hyoudou stalled while she returned to their territory and turned to leave. A different scene followed. A young boy was forced to his knees, hands and feet bound as two men dragged him toward a pit that swallowed light and left only cold blackness. One of the men told the boy that he should be grateful to witness a spirit of emotion and that being bound to an incarnation would be a rare opportunity. He inspected the boy, deciding this one might work, and ordered the keepers to throw him. When the boy was hurled into the darkness, the men were told to keep watch and report back in 3 days. The two keepers exchanged uncertain looks as terrified screams rose from the pit. They had cared for the boy for years and had never heard him show emotion. The sound unsettled them. The boy, Issei, twitched once, twice, and the shadow that had clung to him began to peel away. When he looked up, the warmth that usually lived in his exposed eye was gone, replaced by cold resolve. He exhaled and frost ghosted from his breath. With a single word, he commanded the tendrils around him to fall away, and they recoiled and vanished as if repelled by an unseen force. Saji watched, eyes widening, and shouted that he had to get to the student council president. He ran faster than he had ever thought possible, racing to reach her in time. Saji arrived just as Issei's spear threatened them both. He braced his sacred gear to stop the blow and felt a sharp impact that left his hands trembling. Issei's expression remained unreadable. He drove his knee into Saji's midsection, knocking the wind out of him and sending him forward into a protective dive. Issei raised his spear as if to strike again. Water surged in the area, twisting and responding to Issei's cold focus. He kicked off Saji to spring forward, rolling and using the momentum to accelerate. Tendrils of water trailed after him like living rains, leaving a swath of destruction in their wake. He saw an opening and cut toward Sona, who fumbled and nearly dropped the circle that had been supplying the water. She scrambled to form another as a defensive screen. Issei silently counted 2, then shattered Sona's pale barrier with the butt of his spear. The impact sent the defensive construction flying and struck Sona, pushing her off balance. She demanded who he was, still clinging to the suitcase that was the goal of the raiding game. Saji yelled in outrage, demanding what Hyoudou was doing, but Issei ignored him and scanned the area with cold indifference, eyes fixed on the suitcase. A sudden surge of movement from Issei forced Sona to react. A sweeping strike brushed past her hand and forced her to release the suitcase. She attempted to activate a new magical circle, but Issei's foot connected with her torso and the force sent her airborne. Saji launched himself after her and caught her, their combined momentum driving them into a tree and splintering the bark on impact. Sona grimaced and placed a hand on her midsection, feeling the sting of the collision. Saji assured her that he was fine but insisted that she focus on the mission instead. Saji asked in concern as he shook off the ringing in his skull with difficulty. Sona bit her lip and watched Issei gracefully catch the suitcase before it hit the ground. Sona wondered what had happened to Hyoudou, noting that he seemed different, definitely faster and more brutal. Saji slowly stood and tested his limbs. He admitted he did not know what had changed, but he vowed he would do everything he could to get that back and told the president that they were going to win. He turned toward her, determination blazing in his eyes. Sona whispered his name, taken aback, then shouted for him to duck when she saw something behind him. The pawn obeyed without hesitation. The air above him whistled as a crimson-red spear swept through, brushing a few hairs. Saji pushed off the ground in a remarkable display of acrobatics and landed behind Issei. The red dragon remained still, the spear in his left hand and the suitcase in his right. Issei breathed that this was going to be tough. Akino cried out triumphantly, momentarily breaking her composure to excitedly show Rias her spoils. The crimson-haired president nodded tersely, sheltering behind a stray boulder to avoid a wicked sharp icicle before retaliating with a sphere of destruction. Rias announced that they had reached the goal and then worried about how to break out of the situation. She peeked out and decided to use Gasper's vision. Rias gently asked Gasper if he could use his eyes on their opponents. Gasper nodded nervously and stuttered in response, unsure but willing. Rias drew him close in a reassuring hug and told him that if he could not, she would find another way to get them out. It was her responsibility as president. Gasper regained some confidence and affirmed that he could do it and wanted to help. Rias smiled brilliantly in thanks and instructed him to aim at the west side where Tsubaki and Ruruko Nimmer, a fellow pawn, were stationed. Rias explained that if they could take out the queen, breaking through would be much easier. Gasper closed his eyes to calm himself. Rias guided him to the side of the rock and prepared to signal. On her count, Gasper opened his eyes and activated his power. Rias signaled, and everyone ran for the forest. Time seemed to pause for a heartbeat as Gasper used his ability. The moment he triggered it, the group sprinted away. Kiba carried Asia in a bridal carry while Kaneko fended off magical potshots. Akino launched attacks of her own and kept pace with Rias to act as her bodyguard. Akino teased that this was pretty fun, and Rias, ducking as a boulder grazed the top of her head, replied that it was. Rias tapped her ear device to contact Issei and reported that they had the suitcase and were headed back, but all she received in return was a grunt and a muffled curse. She cursed under her breath and forced her feet into the ground, skidding to a stop as Tomo Meguri, Sona's knight, crashed down from above with a katana raised. Kiba intervened, rushing ahead to intercept Tomo and clashing swords with her in midair while urging the others to go on. Rias called out thanks for Kiba's help and asked how long the game had been going on. Akino supplied that it had lasted nearly 3 hours, and when Rias asked how much of that time had been spent searching for the suitcase, Akino estimated 45 minutes. Rias wondered how Issei was faring. Rias complained about the number of traps as she sidestepped a magical landmine and ducked under a swinging log that activated at her approach. She took Asia by the waist and lifted her out of harm's way. Asia shrieked and clung to the president. Akino noted that this was Sona's handiwork and would be unsurprising for her to set up such defenses. Rias agreed and ordered Asia to duck, giving herself a window to fire at the knight running alongside them. Tomo broke away and vanished into the forest. Kiba apologized for getting sidetracked and losing the opponent, and Rias told him that his presence was enough. She asked him to go ahead and clear the path of traps before returning. Kiba nodded, summoned another sword, and ran off to scout ahead. Rias hefted the suitcase and urged Akino to move. Akino responded eagerly and gathered magic, unleashing a terrifying bolt of lightning that heated the air as it passed. Tsubaki and Momo Hanakai split apart to avoid electrocution, and Akino acted a magical circle as a temporary wall to stall their advance. Rias thanked Akino for the cover. Akino warned that it would not hold long with Tsubaki and Momo working against it. Rias kept the priority clear that buying time was what mattered. Gasper answered that he was ready, and a swarm of black bats with glowing red eyes flew down, his voice echoing in an eerie chorus. Rias asked how far they were from their territory. One of the bats flew over the treetops, searching for the glowing square that marked their location on the map, and reported that it was around 7 miles away. Rias sighed at the distance but resolved that it did not matter. They would move while their opponents were still passive. She wondered whether Sona had reached their territory yet and led the group onward. Saji was losing. That was the blunt truth. He was being decisively beaten by Issei Hyoudou, a man he regarded as both friend and rival, with such ease that it was almost humiliating. It infuriated him. All his training with Tannin in the mountains, the tutelage from an ultimate-class devil, and modifications to his sacred gear by Azazel felt useless against the gap between them. He refused to accept that hard work meant nothing. Saji gritted his teeth and dragged himself up from the ground for the 4th time in 10 minutes. He had dreams too. He wanted to stand with Sona Citri, his student council president, and the woman he deeply cared for. If he had to sacrifice everything to support her dream, he would do it. Summoning everything he had, Saji invoked Vritra promotion. Pitch-black flames answered, roaring to life and forming a massive pillar into the sky. Sona was stunned as the flames folded and took shape, cloaking the pawn in the form of a dragon. The dragon rose, lifting its serpentine body and belching black fire upward. Issei watched with a cold, calculating calm, as if convinced that even this would not tip the scales. The dragon roared when it sighted Issei. A small part of its mind, not clouded by Vritra's haze, recognized him as an enemy. It lashed out with a spear-like tail at incredible speed. Issei blurred and reappeared on the dragon's crest, moving Gibalg downward. The dragon twisted around the spear, trying to crush him in its jaws. Issei responded by launching Gibalg into the air and invoking Ignis Draconi, placing his palm on a huge fang and unleashing flames that both struck the dragon and pushed Issei free of its jaws. Issei landed in the center of the square and caught his spear, the suitcase in his possession taunting Saji and Sona. Sona watched helplessly. Ruruko Nimura arrived with Tsubaki, Tomo, and Momo, apologizing and explaining that they had failed to prevent Gremory-senpai from getting the suitcase. Sona clicked her tongue and glared at Issei, unnerved by how cold and dangerous he had become. He seemed unlike the kind, occasionally mischievous man she knew. Momo asked where Saji was, and everyone turned to the massive black eastern dragon dominating the field. Ruruko, surprised to recognize Saji in the draconic form, pointed him out as he roared and belched black fire. Sona asked everyone to set traps to stall Rias, warning that if this continued they might lose. The group agreed and moved to prepare. Sona ordered Tsubaki to stay and help her and Saji defeat Issei, remarking that there was something strange about his behavior. Tsubaki agreed and kept vigilant. They watched as Issei fought the dragon that had once been their comrade. The dragon was pushed back, while Issei showed little sign of exertion. His unemotional expression made him seem frightening. When a stray plume of fire arced toward them, Tsubaki summoned Mirror Alice, her sacred gear mirror, which absorbed and strengthened the flames before reflecting them back toward Issei. The dragon, countering, used a fang to turn and split the reflected stream into 2 smaller streams that slammed against the draconic form. Tsubaki reacted with surprise. Sona unleashed a torrent of water to catch Issei as he fell. When the Sekyurudai met the water, it surged around him, finally weakening him enough that he loosened his grip on both spear and suitcase. Sona urged Saji forward. The dragon threw its weight against the sphere where Issei had been, driving him down and causing the ground to give way. The dragon disappeared into the darkness it created. Tsubaki approached the hole slowly and peered in. Sona, already focused on the larger game, grabbed the suitcase. She reminded everyone that Rias had obtained another suitcase earlier and that they needed to step up their efforts to win. Rias Gremory and her party, Asia Argento and Kiba Hyoudou, arrived. Sona registered Rias's presence and met her rival on the field. Rias asked whether Sona would simply let them pass and cross the finish line. Sona took a battle stance while Tsubaki readied her naginata. Rias sighed that victory was not that simple and asked Kiba to take on Tsubaki. Kiba accepted and charged, engaging Tsubaki in a clash to the side. Rias positioned Asia behind her. The air filled with magic as the 2 teams' leaders clashed. Issei held his arms crossed in front of him, focusing every scrap of nature energy he could spare into his limbs to keep them from being crushed by the black dragon's relentless jaws. gathering power for a counterattack. His sacred gear announced a third boost. He filled his legs with energy, slowing his descent until he came to a complete stop. The black dragon's violet eyes registered confusion at being halted so suddenly by someone barely a fraction of its size. Issei gripped the two feelers on either side of the dragon's snout and, meeting its gaze, deliberately raised his right foot. The dragon panicked, sensing danger but unable to escape Issei's vice-like hold. The foot landed on its nose, snapping off the long appendages and sending the beast crashing toward the surface. Issei freed himself from the rock he had been embedded in, raised a palm, and invoked Ignis Draconi. Fire burst from his hands, streaked through the tunnel, and engulfed the black beast in a spectacular explosion. With the beast momentarily repelled, he crouched, looked up at the nearly 10-kilometer-wide hole their battle had carved, and launched himself upward with a burst of flame to reach the surface. Issei landed in a crouch and stood to look down at Saji, who lay sprawled on the ground. Saji called out from behind him, struggling to rise, blood at his mouth and his body trembling with pain and exhaustion, yet refusing to concede. He insisted that he was not finished. Issei moved to end it quickly and struck Saji with a heavy blow that sent him tumbling several feet. Saji stubbornly clung to Issei's breaths and insisted again that he would not stop, that he needed to win this for Kaicho. Even exhausted and injured, his determination burned as brightly as ever. Issei then stomped on Saji's wrist, causing sharp pain and leaving his hand badly injured, but Saji still refused to let go, stalling for time as much as he could for his MQ. Issei, puzzled by the stubborn resistance, asked why he would not stop. Saji explained that he wanted to make sure no one would ever laugh at Kaicho's dream again. He added with a smirk that he had already done his job and would soon retire. He raised his left hand to reveal his sacred gear, absorption line, primed with a single, fine wire almost too thin to see leading toward Issei's foot. Issei summoned his spear and attempted to sever the wire before it could take effect. Saji reacted by launching another line aimed at the hand that held the crimson weapon. Issei sliced that line midair with his spear, but a dozen others immediately followed, forcing him to dodge in a frantic, almost game-like exchange. The system announced the retirement of several peerage members, including Rias Gremory's knight and Sona Sitter's queen, and the losses only fueled Saji's desperation. He muttered to the dragon within him, pleading for the power to beat Issei. After a moment of silence, Saji laughed bitterly and chastised himself for never being first. The dragon's voice came to him in his mind, questioning whether he would give up. Saji refused and implored the dragon, Vritra, to grant him all its power. Vritra warned that the power might be too much for his body, but Saji insisted, and Vritra consented. The black dragon within the sacred gear pushed beyond its limits and flooded Saji with energy. Threads under Vritra's control froze momentarily as the surge took hold, and Issei seized the chance to slice them, causing them to wither in midair. Issei advanced cautiously, never underestimating an opponent given time to recover. Saji unleashed blaze black fire, and dark flames cascaded from the lizard shape that represented his sacred gear down the cord leading toward Issei's leg. The shock made Issei cry out. Unnoticed by Saji, Issei's eyes shifted back to their usual warm brown. The black flames climbed Issei's left side, searing him where he stood. He pressed on the flames with his gloved hands and activated 0-point breakthrough, gathering energy around the fire, weakening it, and crystallizing it into ice. Saji blinked in surprise at the sudden change in Issei. Issei looked around and noticed the huge gaping hole to the side and began to piece events together. Saji shook his head as if to clear his thoughts and declared his intention to keep fighting. Issei, uncertain about what had happened but willing to fight if that was what Saji wanted, prepared himself. An announcement declared that the raiding game had ended. It was a tie between Rias Gremory and Sona Sitri. Saji expressed surprise. Issei looked up at the sky with an incredulous expression and expressed his disbelief. Draig noted mildly that no one had expected that. The crowd erupted, declaring that it was over. All over the island, alarmed birds took flight, their peace disturbed by the people's outcry over the anticlimactic ending. It was a scene ripped straight from a nightmare, Fire raged all around as men and women screamed, fleeing from the force that had struck their headquarters, a place they had always believed to be a fortress. Their soldiers moved to protect the Imsuris and to buy time for the evacuation into the tunnels connected to the portals leading to safe points. Among the defenders, one soldier stood his ground alone against the bulk of the attack. A troubled comrade approached the boy and pleaded with him to run, promising that they would ignore him if he fled. Another soldier, answering orders without hesitation, reminded the man that their instructions were to eliminate everyone inside. The troubled soldier protested that the target was just a child and argued they should spare him. The commanding officer sighed, about to relent, but then shouted for everyone to get clear as the boy suddenly sprinted toward Jack. The dagger in the child's hand struck Jack in the neck before he could react. Jack made a strangled sound and reached instinctively to summon his sacred gear, but he could not. The defenders cried out in alarm and hastily drew their weapons and gears. In the confusion, the boy became a blur among the attackers, moving with uncanny speed and precision. His blades found their marks with swift efficiency, incapacitating soldiers across the street and leaving a wake of downed opponents. Within seconds, the 30 attackers and their commanding officer lay on the ground, incapacitated, while their leader watched in stunned disbelief as his men were systematically overwhelmed by a single child. The commanding officer ground his teeth, vowing to kill the boy, and summoned his sacred gear. The boy withdrew his dagger when a surge of killing intent came from behind him. He moved before his mind could catch up, crossing his blades to deflect a crimson spear descending toward him. He used one dagger to try to unbalance his attacker and lunged forward with the other aimed at the man's torso. At the last moment, the man moved with speed that nearly matched the boy's. He rode the spear's momentum, spun on his heel, and drove the butt of the spear into the boy's shoulder, sending him skidding across the ground and bouncing twice before he rolled to his feet. The man whistled at how close it had been and gave the boy a long look. He was smaller than expected, seeming quite young, with a clean-shaven face and black hair hanging to his nape. The man complimented the boy's skill, introduced himself as Hyoudou of the hero faction, and asked the boy's name. The boy remained silent, his gaze searching for any weakness. Hyoudou, slightly annoyed by the silence, remarked that just because they were enemies did not mean the boy could ignore him. He admitted he was not getting anything out of the boy, then resolved to finish the fight and return to Cao Cao, tightening his grip on his spear. Issei stood a short distance away, watching the tense duel begin. A voice spoke inside Issei's mind, addressing him as its host and noting that they had finally met again. He thought aloud, wondering why he could see the scene, and asked mentally how the spirit had escaped. The spirit answered that his seal had weakened enough for her to break free of its restraints. Issei suspected she had been manipulating his emotions, and the spirit admitted she had altered him in minor ways, insisting it was not intentional but part of her nature. She explained that being deprived of that nature would be like dying, and spoke with a sincerity that almost sounded like remorse. Issei muttered that he had known a spirit of wrath would make things difficult, and the spirit apologized for affecting him so uniquely, remarking that his case was unusual. Issei scoffed at the implication she had had many hosts, and the spirit conceded that she doubted she would affect others the same way she affected him. Acknowledged without shame that he was special in that way, and the spirit laughed softly, reaffirming that he was indeed her host. Issei opened his eyes to a bland, gray ceiling and thought to himself that it had been enlightening. Valley, standing to his side, asked what he meant. Issei dismissed the question and sat up on the bed, gratefully accepting the cup of water Valley offered and relishing the cool liquid on his dry lips and parched throat. Valley raised an eyebrow but did not press further. He took a seat on a wooden stool beside the bed. Issei asked why he was in a hospital bed and mentioned that he had remembered being conscious when the end of the game was announced. Valley explained that Issei had passed out the moment he returned through the magical circle, that the Gremory girl had been panicking until the Lucifers arrived with her, and then narrowed his eyes to demand what had happened back there. Azazel entered behind Valley and closed the door, saying that he wanted to know as well. Issei paused, set the cup on the bedside table, and insisted that it was not fair to call it fainting. He preferred to say he had passed out. When Valley asked what difference the wording made, Issei muttered that it mattered to him and waved his hands vaguely. Azazel leaned forward with curiosity, but Valley moved to cut him off before he could press. Issei sighed and decided it was time to tell someone. He closed his eyes briefly, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and noted that his clothes had changed into the Kuo Academy uniform. His usual black jacket was gone. He then revealed that he had a spirit inside him. Valley responded in disbelief that Issei was already the Sekyudai, implying that such things were expected, but Issei clarified that this was not that kind of spirit. He explained that it was a spirit of emotion, an incarnation. Valley tilted his head uncertainly while Azazel's eyes widened at the revelation. Issei said that the incarnation was of wrath, one of the worst things that could have attached itself to him. It had been thrown into a pit and had slowly bound itself to his soul. When Valley asked, with a vague gesture, whether it did anything specific, Issei traced circles on his chest and admitted that it was simply there, annoying, but not openly malicious. The most the incarnation could do was manipulate his emotions, and Issei could suppress that most of the time. He added that the incident that had caused him to pass out had been a one-time occurrence, and he hoped it stayed that way. Azazel asked whether the incarnation could be separated from him. Issei offered a thin smile and explained that, as far as he knew, the only sure way was if he died. He did not like the thought of dying, preferring life instead. Valley summed up that the situation was unfortunate, and Issei shrugged, saying that one learned to live with it. Drake spoke up to clarify for Azazel, explaining that Issei had created a seal that used some of his own power to suppress the incarnation's taint. Azazel asked how Issei had managed that. Issei answered modestly that he was competent at creating magic circles, though his reserves were weak, so he relied on rituals and other methods to compensate. Surzek's Lucifer entered the room with his wife, Graphia, and the handsome young man with light blue eyes and green hair who had been present at the young devil's meeting. Issei, having studied devil culture, recognized the green-haired man and inclined his head in greeting to Lord Surzek, Lord Beelzebub, and Lady Graphia. The green-haired demon lord joked about not knowing Surzek was the subject of conversation, and Surzek teased him in return. The green-haired man feigned injury at the tease, and their banter was light and friendly. Surzek gestured toward Issei and suggested that someone else might want to speak with him. The green-haired demon lord said that Azazel already had the information he needed and that he had examined Issei. He noted, in casual clinical terms, that aside from the possibly malicious incarnation of wrath and a life force that felt shaken, Issei was in good condition. The demon lord guessed that Issei had been knocked out because the spirit had attempted to communicate with him. Issei nodded slowly, feeling exposed by the easy discovery of what he had considered a guarded secret, something that, he admitted inwardly, was not well concealed to anyone with decent sensing abilities. The green-haired lord declared that he had all he needed and tossed a chart onto the table at the foot of Issei's bed. He asked to borrow Azazel's findings, and Azazel, pouting, handed them over with a request that they be returned. The demon lord waved in farewell and mentioned he had work to finish at his lab. Azazel said he would accompany him and grabbed his coat with obvious eagerness to see the lab. Valis said he would go along as well, claiming he had to prevent them from breaking anything. The green-haired lord feigned hurt at Vala's lack of trust, and Vala reminded him of a past failed experiment that had caused major damage. They exchanged light warnings and promises, with Azazel swearing on his honor that he would behave. After they left, Surzek asked how Issei was feeling. Issei smiled and said that he was fine. Issei asked how the club president and the others were doing. Surzek admitted that Issei had given them quite a scare as he sat on the edge of the bed opposite him. He said his younger sister had been ready to storm the hospital when he wouldn't let her in. She was now with her peerage. 2 of her knights had been hurt and Zenobia had cracked a rib, but Surzek hurried to reassure Issei that they were fine. Issei leaned back, placing his hands on the bed and looking up. Graphia bowed and moved to the kitchen to prepare some tea. Suddenly remembering the rough confrontation he had with the Citri pawn, Issei asked about Saji with a grimace. Surzek replied that Saji would pull through, and that he was strong, reminding Issei that Saji had been trained by Tanin, a former dragon king and an ultimate class devil. He observed that both Issei and Saji shared a stubborn streak that had carried them into unexpected places, then fell into a reminiscent tone about his own youth and the days when he and Ajuka were planning their revolution. He noted that he had once had the same determined look in his eyes. Issei felt uncertain how to respond but appreciated the sentiment. Surzex laughed and apologized for rambling, and Issei assured him it was not a problem as he picked up the chart that had been left on the table at the foot of the bed. Surzex sighed in relief and teased that it would be a shame to scare off his future brother-in-law. He hinted that Issei was playing a certain game and warned him not to toy with other people's feelings because it would only break their hearts, then raised a hand in farewell and left. Grafia returned carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea and reminded Issei that he had forgotten his tea. Issei told her to go to Surzex and insisted he could take care of himself. Grafia bowed to thank him, set the tray down, and hurried after her husband. Issei stretched and decided he needed to visit the Citri peerage. While it may not look like it at times, Sona Citri cared deeply for her peerage, almost as much as her friend and rival, Rias Gremory. She had seen the potential in every one of her pieces and had made it her goal to nurture it and let their skills and talents grow. She had taken them under her wing and was fiercely protective of all of them. When her pawn, Saji Genshuru, had been badly beaten in the course of a raiding game, Sona sat by his bedside in the hospital, gripping her skirt as she tried to hide her concern. Tsubaki, Momo, and Tomo had all been taken out as well. Their sacrifice weighed on her, but the injuries they suffered were minor compared to Saji's. He now bore multiple injuries, visible cuts and bruises, and a wound above his left eye that might scar. He was also suffering from severe exhaustion, both physical and magical. They waited in a private luxury room reserved for those higher in the hierarchy. A knock came at the door and Issei Haida entered, half-hidden and clearly nervous. Issei asked whether it was a bad time, and Sona, keeping a faint reserve in her voice, told him it was fine and invited him in. At the back of the room, Momo and Ruruko exchanged hostile looks toward the young man, which Sona recognized as natural given their feelings toward Saji and what had happened. Issei asked after Saji, eyes averted as the room's atmosphere turned cold. Sona noted that Saji was unconscious and recuperating, and Momo muttered that it was no thanks to Issei. Issei wilted under the looks, conflicted, but then he bowed deeply before the group and apologized. The apology stunned the room into silence. Saji forced himself up to sit against the headboard at the sound. Ruruko hurried. To his side, Momo close behind. Saji grinned through the pain and asked what all the fuss was about. Issei, still on the floor and crouching rather than kneeling, told him that he had beaten him badly and that Saji had even slipped into a brief coma. Saji thanked him for reminding him how badly he had lost, using dry humor to keep the mood light, and explained that it had been a raiding game so fighting was expected. He added that he had trained under Emestir Tannen for a month and was proud that he lasted as long as he did. Losing simply meant he had room to improve. Issei hesitated, reading Saji's determined expression and recognizing someone who would not be swayed by complaints. Saji then teased that next time he would be the winner and raised a fist playfully toward Issei. Issei chuckled, stood, and bumped his own fist against Saji's. Saji warned that it would not be easy to lose in front of the student council president. Issei replied that he rarely lost, and Saji tossed a pill his way in mock retaliation, which Issei caught easily. Momo asked if Saji was okay and whether he was upset about losing, but Tsubaki advised the others to leave the two boys be. Tsubasa admonished Saji gently to rest and brought a pillow to cover him. Saji tried to stand, but Issei pressed him gently back down, insisting he rest and recover before doing anything else. Saji accepted, telling Issei to leave so he could rest properly. Issei waved and began to leave. Sona, returning to her composed self, offered Issei some tea. He declined and said he had to see his leader first, explaining that he had come straight to apologize after waking up. Sona noted, mildly exasperated, that Issei had things backwards and was relieved he was not a member of her peerage, since he would give her headaches. Issei feigned offense and said he would do well in her peerage. Sona surprised him by smiling and acknowledging that she was sure he would do well. Saji suddenly called out loudly for Issei, thrashing a bit in the bed until Tsubasa gently restrained him. The small display lightened the room, and the others returned to attending to Saji's recovery. Saji erupted, taking back everything he had said and accusing them of cheating. The two of them stared at Saji and each let out a short laugh. Issei chuckled and shook his head, noting that Saji had it bad and asking if she knew that. She replied with great dignity, though Issei could see the amusement in her eyes if he looked closely. Issei drawled sarcastically that she should not let him interrupt and that he needed to go see his king. They exchanged brief goodbyes. He turned back and, when she asked what he wanted to say, Issei told the student council president that it had been a good game. The Azure Dragon Emperor blinked at the reception he received when he entered the room. His friends crowded around him, each speaking and asking questions. Rias cut through everyone else and asked where he had been, why he had not been in his room, and why his older brother had not said anything. He felt even more compelled to answer with everyone staring earnestly. He explained that he had been in Sona's room. Rias expressed surprise and asked why. He smiled and said it had been just some business. Gasper asked earnestly why Issei had passed out, his concern obvious. Issei admitted that Gasper's blushing and odd behavior had made him uncomfortable. Gasper asked if he would be all right. Issei waved it off and said he would be fine because Lord Beelzebub had said so. Kiba bit his lip, still concerned for his friend but beginning to relax once he heard that the demon Lord Beelzebub himself had checked on Issei and declared him all right. Issei told them to lighten up, rolling his eyes at the lingering gloom. He insisted it had been only an episode and urged them not to worry, then said he was starving and asked where they would have dinner. Aquino corrected him that it was 6 in the evening. He blinked, drew the blinds open to reveal the sun setting and the sky darkening, and asked how long he had been out. Asia answered that he had been out for 3 hours and that they had all been very worried about him. They told Issei that Surzex would not allow them into his room. Issei apologized without understanding why. Kiba accepted the apology and smiled, placing a hand on Issei's shoulder. Issei returned the smile, though it was strained when Kiba still held his shoulder 10 seconds later. Issei asked Kiba to release his shoulder. Kiba feigned surprise and slowly removed his hand after a few more seconds, saying it was all right. Issei half pleaded to eat, noting that everyone in the room watched the two of them with something like jealousy in their eyes. Aquino gave a mischievous grin and agreed that they should eat. Rainier muttered insults under her breath as she picked up a lamp and began cleaning the table, calling the situation and the house stupid. Rainier, the fallen angel who had once clashed violently with Issei in a previous confrontation, was now dressed as a maid and cleaning the room where he was staying at the Gramarye house. The family, part of the remaining 34 pillars and quite well off, maintained an estate that would not be out of place in the wealthier districts of the world. In other words, it was a very large house with spacious rooms that required constant maintenance to remain in order. Rainier had accidentally drawn the attention of Graphia Lucifuge, the strongest queen of the underworld and a very strict steward, and had been compelled to join the cleanup crew. Rainier muttered again that it was all Issei's fault, and set the lamp down with an irritated sigh. Rainier had used more force than necessary and cursed when the object toppled and fell to the floor. She sighed, bent to pick it up, and returned it to the table much more gently. In her memory, she had drunkenly demanded that he fight hard and uphold his image as her words she could hardly believe she had spoken to him. She blamed the alcohol, Azazel's cold indifference, and the stress of life not going to plan for her need to unload her feelings. She also remembered him teasing that she was a fierce little maid. Even so, she had to admit she felt lighter than she had months ago. After a moment of pause, she exhaled and got off the bed to continue her duties. Just then the door swung open. Rainier grumbled that she was doing her job, expecting Graphia, who had drilled her into being the proper servant. Instead, Issei leaned casually against the doorway, smirking at her as she became entangled in the sheets and stumbled. She let out a startled cry and addressed him reverently, then freed herself and asked why he was there. Issei explained that the room was technically his and tossed a paper bag to her. He said it was for her and told her she could open it without worry. Rainier thanked him and then mentioned that Graphia had said they would all return in 3 hours. Issei waved the reminder off and explained that the president and the others had wanted to go to the mall, so he had gone ahead. He added that they would be returning to the human world next week and suggested she tell him if there was anything she wanted to see or buy while they were still here. Rainier admitted she had no particular place in mind. Issei offered to help if she decided on anything, then said he needed a bath. Rainier offered to prepare his clothes, but Issei declined, insisting he could handle his own preparations. She shuddered at the thought of another scolding from the stern maid and explained that she preferred not to risk it. Issei conceded, grabbed a large towel from the closet, and said he was going to shower. 10 minutes later, Issei walked out of the bathroom feeling refreshed, wearing a simple white shirt and comfortable slacks, drying his hair with a towel. Hungry, he headed for the kitchen to make a snack. Millikas burst out of the hallway that led to the lesson rooms, calling for his older brother Issei. Issei smiled and asked why Millikas was not in class. Millikas announced that he had finished early and looked to Issei for praise. Issei indulged him, ruffling his hair and congratulating him, joking that if he kept it up he might even surpass his father. Millikas asked hopefully if Issei really meant it and then pouted when Issei teased him to stop. Grafia appeared behind them and ordered the boys to stop bothering Issei. Issei, surprised, stammered that Millikas was not bothering him. Millikas nodded rapidly in agreement. Grafia asked if they were sure in a tone that made them tense. After a long moment she sighed, gave them a soft smile, told them to have fun, and walked away to continue with household tasks. After a stunned pause, Millikas begged Issei to stay forever. Issei laughed and firmly refused, joking that his heart could not handle that kind of affection and that he would collapse in a year. He quickly changed the subject and offered to make pancakes, which Millikas eagerly accepted. 10 minutes later they sat at the kitchen table. Issei cleaned up while Millikas sat with the food untouched, cheeks flushed in embarrassment. Issei realized that although Millikas excelled academically, he was hopeless at housekeeping. The pancake attempt had left the kitchen covered in flour, eggshells, and spilled milk. Issei told him next time to leave the cooking to those who knew how to do it to avoid another disaster. Millikas agreed glumly. A few hours later Issei wandered the household, bored. Millikas had gone shopping with his mother after being scolded for the kitchen mess. A maid informed Issei that Rias Gremory and her peerage had arrived. He thanked her and went to greet them, only to be met with stunned silence. Rias looked perplexed, Kiba wore an unsmiling face, and Asia stood frozen. Issei asked what had happened. Kiba shrugged and nodded toward Kaneko. Kaneko pointed to Akino. Akino glanced between Kaneko, Issei, and then Rias, unable to finish her thought. Rias took Asia's hand and squeezed it to show support, then revealed that Asia had been proposed to. Issei reacted in shock and demanded when and by whom, insisting that Asia was too young for that. He stepped forward and wrapped Asia in a protective embrace, holding her close and trembling as he refused to accept the idea that she would be given away. The others exchanged uneasy glances at Issei's outburst. Asia looked confused and a little awkward but gently patted his head and reassured him that she would not leave him. When Issei asked for a promise, Asia smiled and affirmed that she promised. Relieved, Issei brightened, but his expression quickly hardened into determined resolve as he vowed to confront the man who had proposed. He muttered about teaching the man a lesson and making sure Asia stayed safe. The group quietly backed away as Issei's intensity grew. Akino asked how Asia had met Astaroth, teasing that maybe it had been at a party and making a light, proud remark about Asia growing up. Asia blushed and denied that was the case, explaining that she had first met him when she was still human. Issei connected the details and realized that Astaroth had been the devil she had healed while she was with the church. Asia confirmed his understanding. Kiba joked that perhaps it was fate, then quickly regretted the remark when Issei shot him a dangerous look, prompting Kiba to apologize and fall silent. Issei declared that he would never let anyone take Asia away, cementing his role as the overprotective older brother. Kiba watched with a mix of amusement and pity at how oblivious Issei was to the feelings around him, thinking to himself that there should be a limit to how dense some people could be. 2 weeks later, the Gremory peerage, along with Rainier, gathered at the mansion's main entrance to say their farewells for the summer vacation. Millikas pleaded with his older brother Issei, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes and asking if he would visit soon. Issei answered that he would as long as Rias allowed it, and glanced toward her. Rainier muttered something under her breath and then fell silent. The son of Lucifer turned to Rias, hugged her around the waist, and begged her to return soon. Rias laughed and ruffled his hair, promising they would visit as soon as they could. A short distance away, Graphia approached Issei, who leaned against a pillar. She bowed and then dropped the formal maid demeanor for a moment, blaming him for how Milikas had turned out. She admitted she had hoped to raise a perfect noble, but, with Issei and Surzex as role models, that proved unlikely. Her expression softened as she looked at her son, and she acknowledged that Milikas needed an older brother figure in his life. Graphia then offered Issei a sincere bow of thanks. Issei fumbled with his reply before returning the gratitude, thanking Graphia for everything she had done for Rainier and for letting him spend time with Milikas. He stood, waved his goodbyes to Graphia, Setsuya, Vinala, and Milikas, and took his place in the carriage with his friends. Milikas waved energetically in response. A few hours later, the carriage left them in front of the train station bound for the human world. Issei complained about taking the train instead of a magic circle, questioning why they had not used faster transportation. Everyone smiled indulgently except Rainier, who grumbled that carriages were impractical these days. They settled into the carriage. Rainier used the time to fall asleep almost immediately. Rias moved to the front to speak with the driver while the others rested. Issei complained about the 2-hour journey and pointed out that a magic circle would have been quicker. Aquino admonished him that a person should always travel with style. Issei muttered that he was not a lady and, conceding the point, took out a book and tried to read. After an hour of little happening and most of the passengers asleep, Issei grew bored, stood, stretched, and went to the bathroom. The moment he closed the compartment door, a dark blur lunged and tackled him to the floor. Issei reacted instinctively, rolling onto his back, planting a foot against the intruder's midsection, and sending the figure tumbling backward. He rose as his gauntlets flared into being at his sides. The figure groaned and scolded him for rough treatment, and Issei recognized Kuroka, dressed in a kimono. She pouted and said she had wanted to see him without meeting the others. Issei protested at being ambushed, and Kuroka tapped him on the head in annoyance. Kuroka then spoke more seriously, telling him that his life force meant he would not live past 100. She said Valley had told her, and Issei admitted he had suspected as much and that 100 years would be more than he had expected. Kuroka reacted with fierce concern, pushing him back against the wall and urging him to think about the people who cared for him, Valley, Ophis, Chiron, Rias, and the others. She pleaded that they would be devastated if he were suddenly gone. Issei paused, noting quietly that Kuroka's tone had changed, and then listed all the measures he had tried to extend his life: a magic dagger that could kill magic, a horn of plenty that proved useless, a trip to an old crone in China who could not help, and attempts with the Yukai faction and Senjutsu in Kyoto. Nothing had worked. With a resigned shrug, he resolved to enjoy whatever time he had and to look on the bright side of life. Issei had been thinking that now that he had a home, he might as well spend his remaining days there when a sharp slap landed across his cheek. He rocked back, touching the reddened mark, and saw Kuroka standing over him, her hair hiding her eyes. He took a cautious step back. Kuroka tackled him and brought him down to the floor. He started to ask what she was doing, but another slap landed, and both of his cheeks flamed red. She called him an idiot, each word punctuated by a strike, until he grabbed her wrist to stop her. He demanded an explanation. Kuroka shouted that he had been a fool, then slammed her forehead lightly against his to make him dizzy and free herself. She collapsed on top of him like a puppet with its strings cut and rested her head on his chest. Issei felt a warm presence and, for a moment, relaxed. He asked what she was doing. Kuroka scolded him for not consulting the Yukai in Kyoto about his condition and for asking for something trivial. She explained that healing Senjutsu could speed healing, restore stamina, and even mend life force, and she shook her head at his stubbornness. He needed to learn to depend on others sometimes, she said, laughing softly at him. Their faces were close for a quiet, tender moment. Kuroka teased him for becoming a pervert in a playful way and took his hand before withdrawing. A brief, neutral pause followed to let the moment pass. At that moment, everyone else entered the compartment, with Rias leading them. Rias had been asking what was taking so long but froze when she saw the scene. The others fell silent as well, all except Kuroka. Kuroka greeted Rias casually while still sitting on top of Issei, who was known as Rias's pawn and romantic interest. Rias stammered in astonishment, asking how Kuroka had gotten in and when. Kaneko glared and asked Rias, addressed as Big Sister, what she was doing to Issei. Kuroka replied that she had simply been teasing him, ignoring Issei's indignant squeak. An inquisition followed. Kiba shook his head sadly at the grilling his friend was undergoing and thought that day they had lost some of Issei's dignity. A brown-haired girl with twin tails introduced herself with a bright smile, a silver cross hanging at her chest, and an aura that seemed noticeably more devout than before. Issei smirked in smug satisfaction, leaning back against his chair with his arms crossed as everyone, mostly the boys, shouted in joy at another picturesque girl joining their class. Issei thought aloud that he knew how the world worked and then held his arm out expectantly toward Rias. The redhead rolled her eyes good-naturedly but handed him a 1,000-yen bill anyway. Irina looked confused as others, except Kiba and Gasper, chuckled at the exchange. Issei dismissed it with a smug air, pocketed the bill, and dropped onto the couch, then asked why Irina had come to Kuo Academy, admitting that he liked having an appealing girl around but genuinely wanting to know her purpose. Drake mentally complained that Issei was laying it on too thick, and then offered a teasing remark about his long experience with humans. Issei mentally rolled his eyes at Drake. Irina blushed lightly and thanked Issei. At that moment, Sona Citri and Azazel arrived. Azazel entered with his trademark slouch and hands in his pockets while Sona looked somewhat miffed by his presence. Issei blinked at their arrival and wondered why they were there. Azazel raised an eyebrow and acted as if it was only natural for him to be present, then glanced at Rias in her rightful seat with a hint of disappointment before settling for the couch across from Issei. Sona explained that she was there as the student council president, not as a devil. Issei accepted that explanation. Irina straightened and formally introduced herself as Hyoudou Irina, saying she had come to Kuo Academy as a messenger for the angels and asking everyone to get along. Zenobia smiled and told Irina that such an elaborate introduction was unnecessary because they already knew her. Issei muttered that at least she had not attempted to smash an Excalibur fragment at his face. Zenobia looked embarrassed and reminded him that she had apologized long ago for that incident. Issei reminded her that he had saved her life and that she had nearly repaid it by endangering his. Zenobia sulkily reiterated her apology. Azazel bluntly asked what had happened to Irina. Zenobia reacted with startled irritation at the teacher's phrasing. Azazel observed that Irina's aura felt different and realized that she had become a reincarnated angel. He admitted that he had wanted to help and pouted playfully over missing the chance. Zenobia was surprised and then delighted when Irina confirmed the revelation. Zenobia eagerly embraced Irina, spinning them both in an exuberant hug, proud and enthusiastic. Asia moved closer, declaring that the Lord was kind. The three of them murmured amen together and offered a brief prayer. Issei noted under his breath that they had hit it off quickly. He then widened his eyes as white, feathered wings spread behind Irina. He expressed interest in how the angelic system worked. Irina explained that there were currently 10 angels given the brave saints, the 4 archangels and other seraphs, each associated with 12 cards from ace to queen, while the cards of the king were given to angels who served as MSs. Issei summarized that devils had 15 chess pieces and angels had a quarter of a deck, then glanced at Azazel and asked whether the fallen had any plans to create their own system. Azazel suggested that it would not hurt to have one, noting that the fallen had the smallest numbers and that he would consult Ajuka for blueprints for a new peerage piece. Azazel pondered what to use as a base, rejecting chess or cards as unimaginative. Issei started to question him but let it go. Issei then asked Irina what position she held. Irina proudly indicated that she served as Michael's ace. Zenobia observed that Michael would now be an important support in Irina's life. Issei shrugged and remarked that it was better than recklessly throwing one's life away. He wondered whether the Angel's system and Azazel's potential system might someday lead to rating-style contests between the three factions, suggesting it could be entertaining. His glance toward their chemistry teacher carried meaning. Azazel said such a development might be possible in the future and asked Irina whether the system remained at a prototype stage. Irina confirmed that it did, explaining that for now only the Seraphs used it but that other multi-winged angels would be given the opportunity in time. Azazel speculated that it might take 10 or 20 years before wider adoption, or possibly less if he and Ajuka cooperated with Michael. Issei asked Azazel to talk to Michael and see if Michael would coordinate with the church, because Gasper remained nervous about vampire hunts. Issei placed a hand on the damper's head while making the request. Azazel agreed. Sona intervened, suggesting they begin the welcoming party for Hyoudou Irina. Irina stood as the center of attention and explained that for a while she had viewed devils as enemies and had even confronted some of them, but Michael had instructed that those in the church should learn to get along with others. The group listened attentively as the new student expressed her longing for cooperation and understanding. A few weeks later, Issei yelled in frustration and kicked a gigantic teddy bear across the floor as he descended the stairs, putting on the Kuo Academy blazer over his usual red shirt. He had long since given up wearing his jackets since they were usually destroyed or taken by the various women of the house and never seen again. He complained that it was the 7th time that week and it was only Wednesday. Rias emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of eggs and sausages and noted that one had to admire the effort he went through. She glanced toward Asia with a teasing smile and observed that he had no chance of winning, but his stubbornness was admirable. Issei asked who he had supposedly lost to as he sat down at the table with everyone else. Zenobia interrupted while chewing on toast and mentioned that they were going to Kyoto for their school trip. Issei blinked and asked who had told her. Zenobia replied that Kiryu had, sipping orange. Issei made a face and admitted that Kiryu's sources were unnervingly accurate, though he did not know where she got them. Asia asked if Issei had ever been to Kyoto. Issei nodded and recalled the 2 nine-tailed foxes he had met and befriended. A princess who demanded to be spoiled and a formidable woman with golden hair who could have gone toe-to-toe with gods. He said he had been there about 2 years ago. Akino tilted her head and asked when that had been. Issei thought for a moment, did the math, and confirmed it had been 2 years earlier. Zenobia asked what he had done there. Issei remembered begging to learn sage techniques from the nine-tailed fox, proving his worth to her and her advisors, nearly burning down several temples by accident, discovering a killing stone, stumbling across a rogue fox spirit, and helping with its cleansing, all within 3 days of his arrival. He downplayed it, saying it had been okay. Zenobia added that Kiryu also said a new transfer student was coming later. Issei asked whether it would be a boy or a girl. Zenobia said it would be a girl. The Crimson Dragon King immediately wagered 1,000 yen that the new student would be Irina, explaining that his experience with anime and TV had taught him how things worked. Zenobia blinked and countered that the world did not work that way, and Rias added that if someone was coming they should have received notice in advance. Issei rolled his eyes and remarked that Irina might be an exorcist trusted with a fragment of Excalibur, but she could be surprisingly clumsy and airhead. In class, Issei stared toward the front with bored eyes, only picking up that the teacher was discussing the upcoming sports festival. Through their mental link, Draig asked if Issei planned to participate again. Issei told Draig that he had taken part in most sports last year and intended to pass and stay on the sidelines this time. Irina enthusiastically declared that she and Zenobia would enter the three-legged race and impulsively raised Zenovia's hand without asking her opinion. Issei sighed, dropping his head onto the desk, still tired from his summons the day before. 2 of his regular clients, Morisawa and Miltan, had discovered they both loved anime and had demanded he attend a convention with them after school. The only payment he had received was free admission and a poster of a beloved magical girl show, which now hung in his room. He had also brought home some figurines and replicas of famous tourist destinations in Japan that Rias had eagerly appropriated. He smiled at the memory of Rias giving him a brief, grateful hug in thanks, which had made him grin. Asia asked whether Issei would participate in the sports festival. Issei apologized and said he would not. Seeing Asia's disappointed expression, he promised he would still come to watch and cheer her on. Asia resolved to do her best for his sake, looking determined. Issei laughed and put a hand on her head, teasing that making him say all that for nothing was mean. Asia rubbed the back of her head, a habit she had picked up from him, and laughed awkwardly. Zenobia and Irina urged each other on as they ran, their legs tied together, and their movements were so synchronized that Issei felt unnerved by how instinctively they compensated for one another. Asia sat with Kiryu and several friends, chatting cheerfully while taking part in simple events like the bread-eating race and the item-borrowing game. Matsuda and Motohama watched Zenobia and Irina with keen interest, commenting on their speed and coordination. Issei rose to his feet and cheered enthusiastically for their performance. Matsuda and Motohama laughed and applauded along, swept up by the excitement. Saji arrived and stared at them in mild bewilderment. Issei and the others explained that they were just watching the race. Saji hesitated, then peeled back the bandage on his forearm to show a dark, snake-like mark. Issei asked if it was a tattoo, and Saji quickly denied it, explaining that the mark had appeared a few days after the raiding game and that he suspected it had something to do with Vritra. He covered the mark again and changed the subject by asking which event Issei planned to join. Issei admitted he was sitting out this year to give others a chance, since he had taken part in most events the previous year. Sona, the student council president, and Tsubaki, the vice president, approached and reminded Saji that they needed help at the booths and to keep working. Saji bowed and hurried off while Issei stayed behind. Issei felt Vritra's presence more complete than before. The spirit observed in his mind that Saji had finally met the spirit of Vritra and that, despite being fragmented, he remained a dragon king who would grow powerful. Issei felt pleased for him, stretched, and let out a satisfied groan. Motohama asked where Issei was headed, and Issei answered that he was going to get something from the vending machines. Motohama asked for lemonade and Matsuda asked for tea. Issei accepted their money and offered to buy something for Asia and the others, but they politely declined. Issei retrieved a cold can from the vending machine and looked up to see Kagome, the archery club president, walking toward him with her bag slung over one shoulder. They sat together on a bench and watched another class practice for the upcoming sports festival. Kagome asked Issei if they might see a repeat of last year's performance. Issei laughed with embarrassment and said he planned to stay on the sidelines this time. Kagome expressed disappointment and said she had hoped to see him dominate again. Issei protested that participating in 7 events last year was not that many. Kagome pointed out, realistically, that it had been a significant portion of the 24 events. The bell rang to signal the end of school. Kagome said she needed to go to archery practice and invited Issei to drop by sometime, reminding him that he still needed to train for the competition in a few months. She promised to speak to the student council president about allowing him to participate, confident that his contribution would be considered vital. Issei agreed and stood to leave, brushing himself off while mentioning he had club duties to attend to. Kagome asked why he had joined the archery club when he had shown little interest before. Issei replied dryly that it was important for his continued survival. Kagome paused, then remarked on his habit of staring at people, but she let it go and said goodbye. Issei returned the farewell and watched her go. After picking up Asia, Zenobia, and Irina, Issei went with them to the clubroom and found Rias unusually serious, with Akino at her usual place by her side. Issei asked why Rias looked so serious. Rias explained that their next opponent had been decided. Issei responded that sounded good, though he sounded uncertain. Rias announced that they would face the peerage of Diodora Astruff. Issei reacted with a quiet exclamation. No one else had much to say, and the rest of the day passed in contemplative silence. Later, Issei crouched down to where Irina and Zenobia were resting on the ground and handed each of them a bottle of water, complimenting how well they worked together. Zenobia boasted that it was easy for them to be in sync after years of partnership, and Irina nodded enthusiastically, declaring she was confident that she and Zenobia would win the race for their class. Asia smiled, but Issei noticed something in her voice and decided to talk to her privately. Issei asked Asia to help him with something and led her to the gym shed where they would have some privacy. He gently took her hand and asked if she trusted him. Asia stammered that she did, looking shy. Issei tilted her chin up to meet her eyes and told her that he could tell when she was worried. Asia admitted that she had tried to hide her worries because she did not want to trouble anyone. Issei assured her that she did not have to hide things from him and promised he would not force her to reveal anything she wanted to keep private, but he wanted her to know she could rely on him, even for small comforts like talking over tea. Asia bit her lip, nodded, and smiled. Asia explained that she did not regret saving someone in the past, even though doing so had led to her being branded a heretic. Issei observed that her willingness to sacrifice for others was typical of her kind nature and asked her to promise not to overwork herself. He emphasized that helping others was admirable, but it should not come at the cost of her own well-being. Asia blushed and admitted she felt the same way. Irina suddenly reacted emotionally, describing the scene as appealing. Zenobia stood and looked at them fondly while Irina dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and declared that their friendship was blessed by the Lord and Archangel Michael. Zenobia and Irina crossed themselves and began to pray in unison. Asia, puzzled, went along with the ritual. Issei awkwardly excused himself and said he thought some people over there needed his help, then walked away. A short time later, the three returned to the field and overheard the end of a conversation. Irina announced her plan to start Irina Shidu's Salvation of Love Club, explaining that members would help those in need without expecting anything in return and that she would spread compassion in the name of the Lord. Issei muttered that he wished her luck under his breath. Asia asked how many people were in the club, and Irina admitted that for now she was the only member, then quickly added that once she convinced President Sona about her idea, she was sure the whole school would want to join. Zenobia and Asia applauded, their eyes wide with excitement. Issei face-bombed and wondered what was wrong with the three of them. After school, the Occult Research Club gathered in their clubroom to watch a recording of the Young Devils match between Glaciolabelas and Baal. Azazel addressed the club, asking everyone to watch closely and warning that even if this opponent was not each person's next challenger, it would be better to be prepared for such a monster of a devil early on. Issei watched with interest and noted how strong they were as Serorg's peerage tore through their opponents. At the end, Zephyrdore's composure broke and he challenged the black sheep of the Baal family to a one-on-one fight. They watched Serorg dodge every attack with contemptuous ease. After several moments of the Glaciolabela's air growing more frenzied, Serorg landed a single brutal blow that lifted his opponent and bent him over. Zephyrdore immediately collapsed from the pain. Issei winced with sympathy. He did not like Zephyrdore, but he still felt sorry for him and figured the loss would sting for weeks. Kiba narrowed his eyes at the paused footage and noted Serorg's incredible speed. Issei observed that such praise from their knight carried weight. Issei then asked the club president about the goblin-like fighter's ranking among the current players. Rias replied that compared to the current 6 players he was actually quite weak, though his family circumstances complicated the assessment. Aquino added the game community's current ranking: Baal 1st, Agar 2nd, Gremory 3rd, Astaroth 4th, Citri 5th, and Glaciolabelas last, with placements determined by the strength of each king and their servants and adjusted after each rating game. Issei recalled that the Glaciolabelas family's previous heir had died and that this boy had taken his brother's place. He then asked Azazel where Serorg would fall on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being a slime and 10 a final boss. Azazel estimated Serorg as a solid 7, perhaps even an 8. Issei whistled in appreciation and asked where someone like Razor would rank. Azazel placed the Phoenix third son around a 4 or 5. Rias observed that Razor was known as the strongest youth. Kiba wondered where Issei would rank. Azazel and Issei exchanged a look, and Azazel offered to show the typical parameter graphs used in rating games, noting that they had distributed the information to all factions to be fair. The parameters were power, technique, support, wizard, and king. Glaciolabelas scored lowest on king, while Rias, Sona, and Sirii were roughly equal. Serorg dominated in power. Issei examined the Baal heir's parameters and saw that power maxed out while support and wizard were at rock bottom. He asked whether he might develop similar traits in the future. Azazel answered that if Issei did well he might, and then warned that if Issei won his match against Diodor Astaroth, the next opponent would be Serorg. Issei reacted calmly to the news. Azazel cautioned him to be prepared, explaining that an unprepared fighter would suffer not just defeat in the games but also a crushing blow to mind and spirit, because Serorg would attack with everything he had. Azazel sighed, checked his pocket watch, and said he had to return to the student council. Before leaving, he set a flash drive on the table that contained the fight between Astaroth and Agars. As Azazel was about to go, a magic circle appeared in the corner of the room. Aquino identified the arrival as Astaroth. A blond young man with a gentle smile stepped through and announced that he had come to see Asia. Issei ignored any stray remarks and focused on Diodora Astaroth, whose aura seemed unmistakably touched by Ophis. Rias and Diodora sat across from each other with Azazel in the corner as advisor, and Aquino poured tea for everyone. Diodora stated his intention to trade bishops. Gasper squealed, thinking he might be the subject of the offer, and flailed protectively and awkwardly, breaking some of the tension. Issei sighed and gave him a light knock on the head before dismissing the idea. Diodora began to continue, but Rias interrupted calmly and refused the trade. Rias explained that no matter who Diodora wanted to exchange, she had no interest in trading any of her pieces, not out of doubt about his bishop's ability but because she considered Asia an important part of her family and would not give her up. Diodora asked whether that was because of Asia's ability or her charm. Rias answered that it was because she regarded Asia as her precious little sister. Asia put her hand to her mouth and addressed Rias as club president, green eyes misting with tears. Diodora smiled, but the expression made him appear unsettling rather than charming. He stated that he understood and would return another day, but that he would not give up. He then stood and moved toward Asia, who took a nervous step back. He reached toward her in a way that made her clearly uncomfortable. Issei reacted immediately, stepping in front of Asia and seizing Diodora's wrist in a firm grip while telling him he was bothering her. Diodora, still smiling but with a touch of steel, asked Issei to let go. Diodora declared that it felt disgusting to be touched by a filthy dragon. Asia slapped him across the face. Diodora's head rocked to the side and his cheek reddened from the impact. Asia admonished Diodora not to speak about Issei in that way, surprising even Issei with the vehemence in her voice. Diodora turned and leveled a stare at Issei, who returned it with half-lidded eyes. Diodora vowed that in their match he would defeat Hyoudou Issei, the Hyoudou, and asked Asia to consider his feelings for him. He then fixed his gaze on Issei and promised he would enjoy besting him in the fight. Issei smiled and told Diodora to get lost. Diodora narrowed his eyes and sneered contemptuously, announcing that the match would be in 5 days and that he hoped Issei would not back out. Issei bared his teeth, said he would be there, and called Diodora a slimy little snake. Diodora flinched at the insult. Issei leaned back, a glimmer of dark satisfaction in his eyes as he felt he had struck the right chord. Issei sighed as he set the practice materials back into storage. With no events he had signed up for, Kirio had assigned him the task of organizing the school's miscellaneous supplies, and he had agreed without complaint. A sudden slam made him turn. Zenobia had shut the door with one hand and was pulling a flustered Asia behind her. Issei asked what they were doing. Zenobia ignored him and bluntly told Asia that girls often began exploring romantic relationships at school. Asia asked hesitantly what flirting meant. Zenobia attempted a blunt, awkward explanation about what romantic interactions between classmates could involve. Issei bristled inwardly at her tone and content. Zenobia told him to be quiet for the moment, saying she needed to talk to Asia first and asking him to prepare for the upcoming event. Issei protested in confusion about how one could even practice something like that. Zenobia mentioned that she had done some research into typical teenage relationships. He demanded to know why, and Zenobia shot him a glare before placing her hands on Asia's shoulders and urging him to stop yelling so as not to pressure Asia. She squeezed Asia's shoulders supportively and told her to relax, assuring her that things with Issei would work out. Asia blushed and fiddled with her fingers, speaking uncertainly about Issei. Issei tried to object, but Zenobia pressed on, reminding Asia that they were friends and suggesting they support each other later. Her tone and suggestions embarrassed Asia further and made Issei feel increasingly overwhelmed and lightheaded. Zenovia's behavior then turned more forward in a way that made the situation unbearable, and Issei saw an opportunity to leave. He scrambled toward the window and began to climb through in a flustered attempt to escape. Before he could get clear, the door burst open and Irina stormed in, face flushed and scandalized at the scene. Issei thought fast and explained that he was measuring for uniforms for the upcoming event, an activity for the occult research club meant to be a publicity stunt. He produced a tape measure from his pocket to support the claim. Irina eyed him suspiciously but, faced with the evidence, reluctantly accepted his explanation. Drake, his ever-present inner voice, muttered a warning not to tempt fate, and Issei felt the pressure of the lie hang in the air. Asia then looked at Issei and, uncertainly, reminded everyone that she had been under the impression Issei would be the one to be more forward. Zenovia confirmed that he had been, and she added that he was only pretending otherwise so Irina would not feel left out. Drake grumbled at the awkward outcome. Irina snapped that such matters should be handled more discreetly and privately next time, and that the room was an inappropriate place for anything personal. Issei retorted that discretion was not the only problem here, his protest carrying the exhaustion of someone trying to defuse a humiliating situation. Later that night, Issei finally finished decorating his private room in the newly renovated house. He debated whether to sleep there now and decided to leave it for another day, when the dust and leftover packing could be fully cleared. He closed the door behind him and nearly jumped when he discovered a figure huddled in the hallway. Issei stammered that he recognized her and asked what she was doing there. Rias asked quietly if she could talk to him. He glanced back at his room, convinced it was still covered in dust from the refurnishing, then agreed. Rias stepped into the living room first and Issei followed closely, closing the door behind them. They sat at opposite ends of the couch and a few minutes of awkward silence stretched between them. Rias broke the quiet by asking Issei what he thought of Serorg. Issei admitted that he had not gotten to know Serorg well, but from what he had seen, Serorg seemed dependable, overwhelmingly strong, the kind of person who could push others into doing reckless things yet could also be gentle when it mattered. Rias asked if she could ever be like him. Issei blinked and asked what had prompted the question. Rias explained that she had watched Serorg's fight and realized how outclassed she felt. She listed the others she compared herself to: Sona, the student council president, who was a genius beyond reach; Agars, who supported her whole family on her own; Diodora, who had defeated an entire peerage by himself; and Serorg, known as the strongest youth. Rias confessed that, compared to those people, she did not know what she could claim for herself. She said she was called the crimson-haired ruin princess only because she was born with the blood of Baal, and that compared to Serorg, who, despite being the Baal heir, had been cursed with lacking their traits and then managed to overcome that through sheer effort. She felt trapped in her family's shadow. She worried that she would always be Rias of Gremory, the little sister of the Crimson Satan, and could never grow beyond that. Her voice carried a desperate edge as she turned pleading eyes to Issei, begging for an answer. Issei considered everything for a long moment. He conceded that as she was now, she would struggle to match her brother or Serorg. He explained that there would always be someone faster, stronger, or smarter, and that the world was unequal in ways people pretended otherwise. There were gaps that could not be closed, distances impossible to bridge, sometimes because of inborn talent, sometimes because others kept moving farther ahead no matter how hard you tried. Rias sank deeper into the couch. Even her ahogue drooped with her mood. Issei knelt before her and placed a hand on her shoulder, asking whether the existence of those gaps meant she should stop trying. He rejected that notion emphatically. He described the boosted gear as a strange, sacred gear. Unlike the divine dividing, it did not leak excess power into magic, and if someone pushed it beyond their limits, the overflow of power could crush the body. He recalled a story Drake had told him about one of the boosted gear's previous wielders. The man had relied on the gear too much and, when faced with a wielder of the White Dragon Emperor in his generation, pushed past his limit and was overwhelmed by the power. Issei admitted he was rambling, then returned to his point. The gifts someone was born with did not determine who they would become. Choices mattered more than inheritance. He warned that he was not promising that training and determination would automatically make anyone the strongest. Life was not a story where one person was the chosen hero destined to eclipse everyone else. Even someone blessed with family ability, wealth, and status was still a person who lived and died like anyone else. Sometimes because of another's strength, sometimes because of a betrayal, sometimes simply because time took its toll. Then he asked what the good thing about that was. Rias asked quietly what he meant. Issei said it meant she was not perfect. Perfection, he argued, was not as majestic as it seemed. It broke people. Even when someone tried to piece themselves back together, something remained lost. Perfection meant no room to grow, no chance to improve. It left a person frozen at the top, isolated while others became stronger through their struggles, through blood, sweat, and tears. Worse, perfection meant never making mistakes. Mistakes, he said, were what made people who they were, moments that forced them to fall, to examine what went wrong, and to rise again determined to do better. Issei asked Rias to try. He urged her not to give up, promising that when she fell or thought herself trapped, everyone, himself, Aquino, Sona the student council president, and the rest, would drop everything and come to her side, not out of duty to a leader, but because they were her friends. He then told her not to forget that her brother was not perfect either. He had survived a war and had to become strong to see another day. He had not emerged from that intact. Those experiences had left scars and had shaped him. Issei emphasized that such things could leave people marked, and that strength often came through surviving and changing rather than being born flawless. Issei's words carried the weight of someone who had learned from hardship and believed a person's worth grew through effort and the support of others. Rias listened, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing as she considered what he had said. Issei reflected that if anyone asked the current Maos, they would say they had their moments, times when they were sure they would die, when hopes and dreams would collapse, and they only survived because of the men at their sides, desperation, or plain luck. He thought that revelation was a lot for a sheltered princess raised in a comfortable, loving home to take in all at once, but he decided she needed to see that the world was not as clean-cut as she believed. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. A beat passed. Rias released a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Issei realized this was one of the rare occasions when her usual composed, high-class facade fell away, revealing who Rias Gremory was at her core. The red-haired devil reached up and wiped at her face. Rias thanked Issei and admitted she had really needed that. Issei assured Rias that it was no problem and that she could rely on him whenever she needed to. He suggested getting her to sleep, teasing that he could not have her lose that beauty. Rias rolled her eyes good-naturedly, stood up, and smoothed down her skirt, reminding Issei that she was a devil and could do whatever she wanted and still look like that. Issei grinned and imagined what the girls at school would give for an ability like that, saying Rias could recruit them all if she claimed it. Rias acknowledged it as a perk of being a devil with a faint smile. Issei pointed out that some would call it cheating, and Rias countered that she called it good genes. Issei rolled his eyes. Rias laughed, relieved by the reminder that Issei and her friends were there for her. Internally she scolded herself for entertaining such thoughts and resolved to remain steadfast. She was her peerage's king, and it would shame them if their king indulged in ugly thoughts. Rias thanked Issei again. Issei told Rias he would always be there anytime she needed him. Issei announced that he was home as he stepped into his house with Kaneko in tow. He blinked when no one greeted him. He usually saw one or two of the people in his house come to meet him. He concentrated and sensed they were all in the living room, along with an additional guest he knew, Valley. He removed his shoes, slipped on indoor slippers, and asked what Valley was doing there as he followed the hallway with Kaneko. They found everyone focused on the TV with unusual intensity. Issei asked what they were watching. Rias looked troubled and urged him to watch for himself. She rewound the recording to the fight. The replay showed a landslide victory for Diodora. Diodora had fought largely alone against the entire Agar's peerage with only occasional support from his own team. Wisps of black smoke billowed from him at times, appearing inconsequential at first but meaningful to those who understood. Issei exchanged a look with Valley, and Valley inclined his head. Valley stood and told Rias that was all he had to say before preparing to leave. Rias thanked him formally. Issei offered to walk Valley out. Aquino teased that they should be concerned, but Issei rolled his eyes and declined to respond. Valley turned to Issei at the door and warned him seriously to be careful around Diodora Astaroth, explaining that anyone who carried Ophis snakes inside them was dangerous. Issei said he knew and asked why Ophis would do such a thing. Valley admitted he did not know and asked if Issei had anything to add. When Issei remained silent, Valley sighed and said goodbye, mentioning that if the Astaroth boy came near him he would fight to see how much power Ophis snakes could grant someone. The two heavenly dragons traded barbs through their bonds with the hosts. Drake told Albion that Albion Issei. Albion retorted the same at Drake. Drake said he had said his piece. Issei sighed and remarked that Drake could be childish. Drake blamed Issei for that behavior. Albion observed that Issei's host was strange, and Drake snapped back that Albion's host was no better. Issei and Valley exchanged a look and laughed at how the dragons were behaving. Issei grinned and mused that it was strange to see the two heavenly dragons together without wanting to fight. Valley told him it was all because of him. Issei shrugged and said he had no regrets. Drake noted that being treated better than a tool was preferable, and Albion agreed. Drake insisted he was still better, and Albion told him to keep dreaming. Rias then announced that everyone would be interviewed on a televised program in the underworld the next day. The others reacted with surprise and asked if it really was a television program. Later, Issei told Asia that she looked fine and gently closed the pocket mirror she had been holding. Aquino teased that Issei still did not understand a woman's nerves, and Asia's hair had been tied into an elegant bun with a few loose strands that added to her appearance. Issei gave Aquino a dry look and insisted it was just an interview, not a campaign. Rias countered that because this was a special occasion for the young devils, much of the underworld would be watching and judging not only the kings but their peerages as well. Issei suggested dressing up. Hyoudou Kiba agreed it was a smart idea and that Rias would appreciate it. Issei asked Kiba if he had an extra jacket. Kiba offered a dress shirt instead. Issei took the shirt and thanked him, though he found it odd that Kiba carried one. Kiba reassured him that his build would probably make the shirt fit, and Issei felt uncomfortably flattered as he headed to the changing rooms. Aquino expressed playful curiosity about Issei's appearance while keeping the tone light. Zenobia asked the vice president whether she had ever seen Issei without his shirt. Rias realized that she had not either. Gasper, as usual, was wearing women's clothing. None of them had seen Issei without his shirt. Rias glanced toward the door where her pawn had just disappeared. Rias greeted Serorg with a wide smile and waved to her cousin, asking how he was. After everyone had prepared for the interview, crew members guided them to the program hall where they ran into the Baal heir and his peerage. Serorg shrugged easily and said he was fine, mentioning that they were about to be interviewed and that he did not understand why he had to wear the noble jacket draped over one shoulder since it would get in the way in a fight. He then grinned boisterously and asked how his favorite cousin was. Rias quirked a smile and noted that it was odd to focus on fighting clothes when he was about to be on TV. Serorg replied that it was better to be prepared and called back to his peerage, who answered with an energetic cheer. A staff assistant wearing a headset informed them that the Baal heir and the Gremmeries were on in 10 minutes. Serorg said farewell to Rias and moved toward his designated program room. As they passed, the wild-haired teen laid a hand on Issei's shoulder, declared that he wanted to fight him, grinned, patted his shoulder, and left with his peerage. Issei watched them go with a complicated expression. Zenobia asked what the look was for. Issei shook his head, dismissed it as nothing, and urged everyone to get the interview over with because Rainier had begged him to take her away from Graphia as soon as possible. Aquino sighed and wondered why Issei put up with that woman so much, calling him too nice. Issei explained that he did not hate Rainier, that she could be amusing once someone got to know her, and admitted that he had always wanted a maid. Aquino pouted but let the subject drop. Once they had entered the room, a staff assistant looked up from her notepad and called Rias Gremmery to the spot she had indicated. The assistant then instructed Aquino, Gasper, Asia, Kaneko, Kiba, Zenobia, and Issei to go to the rooms with their names on them to begin the interview, speaking quickly and efficiently. Issei lounged in the studio waiting area, browsing a devil-made magazine on the coffee table. He had finished his 15-question interview in under half an hour and was waiting for the others to finish. Ravel called his name in shock from the open doorway. He looked up to see her standing with a man who could only be her older brother. The man resembled his father with a touch of riser, so Issei felt he could pick him out of a lineup despite not having seen him at the Phoenix family dinner. Issei raised a hand in greeting, tossed the magazine back onto the table, and walked toward them. He nodded toward the man who was hanging back with a sharp expression and asked for an introduction. Ravel introduced him as her brother, Rambo Phoenix. Issei snorted in laughter, then quickly suppressed it when Rambo sighed as if expecting the reaction. Issei apologized once his face straightened and explained he had not expected the name. Rambo sighed again and said he heard the comparison a lot, mostly from resurrected devils, protesting that he did not resemble the actor and speaking with childish irritation as he stamped his foot. The second son of the noble house Phoenix ranted with obvious indignation. Ravel sidled up and whispered that the underworld had been experiencing a boom in human culture when Rambo was born, and their parents had named him after their favorite actor. Issei held back a snicker and bit his cheek. There was no need to agitate Rambo further. Issei asked what Rambo was doing there. Ravel explained that Rambo had a television program at the studio. Issei bit his lip hard, preferring that to angering another Phoenix. Rambo said he had accepted it and that was why he agreed to make a program there. Issei expressed surprise and admiration, calling the decision brave and saying that facing things like that to become a better person took courage. Rambo looked embarrassed and asked if Issei really thought so. Issei confirmed he did. Rambo paused, then added with a smile that having a TV program was popular with viewers and the money was good. Issei leaned in with a playful grin and asked where to sign up and whether the program attracted a lot of attention. Ravel cut in, amused but slightly annoyed by the joking exchange, and reminded them they had to leave soon so they would not be late. She urged Rambo to use the remaining half hour to talk with the producer about his next projects and pushed him toward the hall. They exchanged farewells before disappearing around the corner. Issei muttered that the two of them were a comedy act on their own. Kaneko emerged from the room assigned to her and asked what he had said. Issei replied that he had been talking about Ravel. The name made the diminutive first year wrinkle her nose, and the waiting area returned to quiet. The others gradually finished their interviews, Gasper first, then Zenobia, Asia, Kiba, Aquino, and finally Rias. The staff thanked the group and bowed as the Gremory group prepared to leave. Once settled in the limo, Rias asked everyone if they were ready for tomorrow. The others nodded. Issei's eyes sharpened. Azazel had implied that the four Maos, or at least Surzek's Lucifer, knew what was likely to happen the next day. He hoped they were wrong and that it would be only another raiding game in a corrupt system, but he prepared for the more likely possibility of an old Mao faction coup. He resolved that it would be safer if he were ready. Issei told them he was pumped, his tone edged with protective determination because he would not let his friends get hurt by anyone who thought they could run the underworld better. The leader announced that it was time and instructed everyone to gather in the circle. They would now be transported to the field. Issei called for Draig, and Draig responded affirmatively to his partner. Flames sprang to life in Issei's hands and his gauntlets formed around them. He sighed, cracked his knuckles, and told Draig that they would see how well they fared against Ophus's snakes.